Every night, the brightest star in our sky watches over Earth. It's called Sirius, the dog star, shining 25 times brighter than our sun and visible from nearly every inhabited region on the planet. Ancient Egyptians aligned their pyramids to it. Its rising marked the rebirth of the Nile and the rebirth of a civilization. But some believe Sirius is more than a star. They claim it's a celestial gateway, a system tied to lost civilizations, advanced beings, and secrets encoded in the Great Pyramid itself. Is Sirius simply a nearby binary star, or has it always been part of a much bigger cosmic story? Tonight, we follow the light. Did you know that Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, is not just a dazzling point of light, but a celestial gateway deeply intertwined with Earth and the galaxy? Found south of Orion, you can locate it by tracing a line through Orion's belt and extending it toward the east. Rising in the southeast, Sirius crosses the southern sky before setting in the southwest, its brilliance visible even in light-polluted areas. Located 8.6 light-years from Earth, Sirius is part of a binary system with its white dwarf companion, Sirius B, affectionately known as the Pup. Its luminosity and position near the celestial equator make it visible from both hemispheres throughout the year. Known as the dog star, Sirius belongs to the constellation Canis Major, Latin for the greater dog. Ancient civilizations revered it, particularly in Egypt, where it was celebrated as the star of Isis. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built to align with Sirius and the constellation Orion, forming a cosmic bridge connected to life, death, and rebirth. Beyond its astronomical significance, the Sirius star system holds profound spiritual and galactic importance. Sirius A and its companions, Sirius B and possibly Sirius C, are believed to be home to various extraterrestrial civilizations, including the Sirians. The term Sirians broadly refers to the diverse Anunnaki races hailing from the Sirius star system and have connections with Earth's ancient history. Pharaoh Akhenaten's radical shift in Egyptian theology, centered on the solar disk Aten, may have been an attempt to realign spirituality with the wisdom encoded in the alignments of Sirius and Orion. The unique energies and spiritual resonance of the Sirius system have made it a focal point of cosmic attention, drawing beings from across galaxies and serving as a symbol of enlightenment, unity, and the mysteries of the cosmos. The Sirius system is not only a physical realm, but also a spiritual one. Deeply connected to higher dimensional planes, particularly the fourth and fifth dimensions, it serves as a conduit for communication and interaction between species beyond the physical confines of the universe. In these dimensions, time and space bend, allowing beings to transcend the physical realm. Many inhabitants of the Sirius system, especially the Aetheric Syrians, are adept at operating within these higher dimensions, utilizing advanced technologies and spiritual practices to attain elevated states of consciousness. This transcendence of the physical world is a defining trait of the Sirians and their culture. Sirius A, the system's brightest star, is a massive and luminous body, about twice the mass of Earth's sun and 25 times brighter. Its intense light and heat have played a crucial role in shaping the environments and ecosystems of nearby planets. As the gravitational anchor of the system, Sirius A maintains the balance of the entire star system and is considered by many advanced species from one of the most intensely UV-radiated systems among the many discovered galaxies. Sirius B, also known as Thule, is a white dwarf that, while smaller and less visible, exerts a vital gravitational influence over its system. Once a massive star like Sirius A, it burned through its nuclear fuel and collapsed into its current form. Despite its diminutive size, Sirius B plays a crucial role in maintaining the cosmic equilibrium of the system, shaping the orbits of nearby planets and moons. There are several various races of native and non-native Sirians. Sirius races. The Aetheric Syrians, also known as the Anunnaki, are beings of plasmic light who evolved into the sixth dimension but can transmit their consciousness to physical bodies. They are angelic guardians of the Sirius star system. Radiant and ethereal, they embodied the feminine polarity and carried forward the spiritual teachings of their Lyron ancestors who established the Emerald Order. Their connection to the higher dimensions allowed them to guide other physical species spiritually and energetically. The Nomos are aquatic, amphibious beings from Sirius B and Sirius C, revered for their spiritual wisdom and advanced technological knowledge. Known as Masters of the Waters, they are deeply connected to the element of water and had close relations with the Syrian leaders of Nibiru. The early Sirians, descendants of their Lyron ancestors, embodied a robust and resilient physicality marked by pronounced masculine strength. Adapting to the intense ultraviolet radiation of Sirius A, they evolved tall, lean physiques, transitioning from feline fur-like skin to predominantly humanoid skin tones in shades of gray, green, blue, rich brown, and black. A visionary Lyron seeder and refugee, Zor-El was the first to engineer the Black Panther of Sirius, a majestic feline later classified within the genus Panthera on Earth and eventually domesticated as black cats. As the early Syrian Lyrons continued to evolve and interbreed, their appearance blended extraterrestrial humanoid traits with Africanic Asiatic influences, featuring elongated heads that highlighted their unique and distinctive features. Early Syrians also exhibited prominent feline humanoid features, a legacy of their Lyron lineage. They cherished tangible accomplishments and peaceful coexistence, yet their resilience and adaptability were key to their survival. Through hybridization, their lineage expanded, notably when a Syrian royal Lyron united with a draconian queen, giving rise to a new Syrian crossbreed race. The Alpha Centaurians, often referred to as Syrian hybrids, represent the Nibiruan royal Atlantean lineage of the Anunnaki houses and race. This majestic group journeyed across numerous star systems, including Alpha Centauri and other constellations, leaving a legacy of exploration and influence. Standing between 10 to 14 feet tall, they are characterized by their muscular physiques and striking dark-hued complexions. Their appearance blends Afro-Asiatic features with feline and draconian traits, reflecting a lineage that embodies both power and elegance. Under King An's ancient leadership, they commanded fleets and led galactic campaigns, demonstrating their civilization's strength and sophistication. Their planet became one of the first melting pots, uniting diverse races and welcoming outcasts, fostering innovation and unity through a shared purpose. The groups of non-native Nibiruans and native Sirians, who ultimately became Atlanteans upon arriving on Nibiru. These groups include the Draconians, Andromedans, and Greys, as well as Lyrans and Pleiadians. From their lineage, a divergent group arose, the Omega Centaurians. These beings retained the muscular and towering build of their ancestors, but exhibited skin tones ranging from light pale skin to very dark-hued skin, but various physical variations on appearance mainly, Asiatic meaning Indo-European, Caucasian, Asian descent. Revered as demigods among humans, the Omega Centaurians and Beta Centaurians became immortalized in the myths and pantheons of ancient civilizations such as Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and the Mahabharata, celebrated as the children of the gods. This blending of bloodlines inspired phrases that resonate through biblical texts such as "I am the Alpha" and the Omega, symbolizing the union of these two powerful lineages. Planet Anshari, Nibiru. Ashari, a formidable gas giant, is encircled by 7 distinct rings and safeguarded by powerful magnetic fields and multiple plasma barriers. It serves as the stronghold of the Anoch Empire, the realm of the Centaurian royal races, a crossbreed race and group of houses with ancestral lineage of Draconians and Lyrans, often referred to as the Old Empire. Beyond its strategic importance, Ashari functions as a critical gateway to a parallel dimension where the Emperor and his court reside, and every 3,500 years this planet arrives in this solar system near Earth. Their planet hosts a network of systems and colonies spanning from the northern to the southern regions. Ultimately, this unified civilization was renamed under the banner of the Atlanteans. Referred to as Nibiru in certain traditions, Ashari exists in the 4th dimension alongside Prince Enki's starship. Historically, Anshari was the 4th planet of the Alpha Centauri A and B system before its celestial migration to the Sirius B system. Henceforth, Sirians, including the Anunnaki royals, should be widely recognized as Atlanteans or Centurians, a distinction unrelated to Earth's fictional centaur mythology. The Anoch Empire and civilization have migrated to several star systems and colonized many planets along the way to their final planet, Nibiru. They have been handed down and were entrusted with the knowledge and wisdom from the Aetheric Syrians and Andromedan Council on how to utilize interdimensional travel through stargates. Sirian starships. Many Sirian starships are masterpieces of advanced biotechnology and engineering, constructed from living, self-healing materials that regenerate after damage. These organic metallic hybrids not only repair themselves, but also adapt to their environment, optimizing their structure for prolonged space travel without the need for traditional maintenance. These vessels are powered by gravimetric and torsion field propulsion systems, which manipulate space-time itself to achieve faster-than-light travel. This method eliminates the strain of relativistic effects, allowing crews to traverse vast distances without experiencing time dilation. Silent and energy efficient, these ships are almost impossible to detect using conventional methods, operating in near invisibility while leaving no environmental footprint. The interdimensional Syrian fleets are defined by two iconic and revered designs: pyramid-shaped starships and T-shaped vessels. The pyramid ships, with their intricate crystalline exteriors, resonate with cosmic frequencies, radiating energy that symbolizes the sacred geometry deeply ingrained in Syrian philosophy. These designs are not merely aesthetic, they harness metaphysical principles, stabilizing the ship and amplifying its energy fields. At their apex lies a crystal plasma energy core, a radiant source of immense power that drives the gravimetric and torsion propulsion systems. These cores channel pure cosmic energy, bending space-time with precision to enable instantaneous travel between star systems. The T-shaped vessels, on the other hand, prioritize versatility and adaptability. Designed for fleet coordination and planetary expeditions, these ships combine advanced technology with elegant simplicity. Their extended arms house specialized modules for energy harvesting, defense systems, and rapid deployment of smaller craft, making them indispensable in both exploration and combat scenarios. Ancient Syrian weapon. Complementing these technological marvels is the Syrian laser sword, a relic of the ancient Emerald Order known as the Nandaka. These weapons represent the pinnacle of Syrian innovation and spiritual discipline. Unlike traditional plasma weapons, the Nandaka employs condensed exotic matter capable of slicing through virtually any material, including other energy-based defenses. The blade's frequency can be adjusted to shift between solid, liquid, or pure energy states, offering unmatched versatility in combat. Embedded with rare crystals that absorb and store cosmic energy, these lightsabers operate indefinitely without requiring external power sources. The Nandaka is more than a weapon. It is a symbol of balance, wielded only by those who have mastered the spiritual and physical disciplines of the Syrian Emerald Order. The diversity of species and races within the Sirius system today is truly astounding. Spanning 12 worlds scattered across the intricate orbits of 3 intertwined stars, the Ashkaru system, a sister system of Sirius, boasts a wide array of environmental conditions ranging from arid deserts to lush tropical and temperate climate planets. These varied habitats accommodate an astonishing multitude of species. Over time, many inhabitants have undergone mutations to adapt to their specific environments, making it nearly impossible to classify all the greys, reptilians, amphibians, humanoid hybrids, and insectoids residing on these worlds into strict categories. Notably, the Thulan planetary system is predominantly inhabited by reptilians allied with the Orion Alliance, who have also seized control of the Ashtar Collective. Masters of genetics and technological innovation, the Ashkaru Sirians have upheld the Lyron tradition of crossbreeding with indigenous populations to adapt to new worlds. Their culture emphasizes science and technology, and some members who departed Thula now hold high-ranking positions within the Ashtar Galactic eco-friendly urban environments. Ashkaru Union. One of their most remarkable innovations is the development of a building material that is incredibly resistant to a wide range of radiations, setting a new standard for construction across the galaxy. Like many Sirians, the Ashkari maintain a plant-based diet, reflecting their alignment with the dietary customs of other Lyron migrants to Sirius. The Ashkaru Tal, or Ashkari, hold a significant place in galactic history, not only for their technological and cultural advancements, but also for their deep ties to influential royal courts. This remarkable race, with its prominent Lyron, Pleiadian, and Grey ancestral lineage, was intricately connected to the royal courts of Nibiru. Alalu, the Anunnaki, royal and Atlantean leader of Anshari under the Anoch Empire, took a consort and spouse who was a full Ashkari. This union symbolized the blending of powerful lineages and solidified the Ashkari's position as key players in the political and cultural evolution of the Anoch Empire. Furthermore, Sud, also known as Ninlil, the wife of Enlil, one of the most prominent figures in Anunnaki lore, was herself an Ashkari woman. Pyramid of Giza and Sirius connection. Under the vast expanse of the Egyptian night sky, Sirius, the brightest star, held immense significance for the ancient Egyptians. Known as Sopdet, it symbolized divine order and renewal, far beyond being just a celestial body. Sirius was closely associated with the goddess Isis, a central figure in Egyptian spirituality, and its helical rising each year marked the annual flooding of the Nile. This flooding was essential for agriculture and life itself, signaling the start of the Egyptian New Year and embodying themes of rebirth and prosperity. Sirius was not the only celestial entity of importance. The Great Pyramid of Giza, a marvel of ancient engineering, was precisely aligned with the stars, including Sirius and the constellation Orion. The southern shaft of the king's chamber is thought to align with Sirius, while the southern shaft of the queen's chamber points toward Orion's belt. In Egyptian cosmology, Orion represented Osiris, the god of the afterlife, while Sirius symbolized Isis, forming a cosmic bridge between life, death, and rebirth. These alignments imply that the Great Pyramid was more than just a tomb. It served as a profound spiritual machine connecting Earth to the heavens. Within this cosmic framework, Pharaoh Akhenaten emerges as an enigmatic and revolutionary figure. His reign during the 18th dynasty brought a radical shift in Egyptian theology. Rejecting the traditional pantheon of gods, he instituted the worship of Aten, the radiant flying solar disk in the sky. With modern interpretations, this was a spaceship that was the abode of the extraterrestrial Amun-Ra. Some ancient accounts suggest that Akhenaten communicated with this so-called god Amun-Ra through advanced, possibly futuristic devices, including the Ark of the Covenant. He relocated these sacred objects from the traditional religious center to a new hub in Amarna. Theorists speculate that Akhenaten's connection to the Anunnaki, Sirius, and the Great Pyramid was intentional and profound. His theological reforms might have been an attempt to realign Egyptian spirituality with the celestial wisdom encoded in the pyramids. The pyramids' alignment with Sirius and Orion could represent a gateway to higher divine knowledge, a pathway Akhenaten sought to reopen. Artistic depictions of Akhenaten and his family add another layer to this cosmic mystery. With their elongated skulls, androgynous forms, and other worldly features, these representations appear almost alien, fueling theories of an extraterrestrial connection to Sirius and Orion. To some, these depictions suggest a royal lineage tied to Amun-Ra, potentially an Anunnaki figure himself, further intertwining Egypt's spiritual heritage with cosmic and extraterrestrial influences. Ancient Syrian history to Earth. The star Sirius, a hub of higher dimensional activity, includes Sirius B, which has faced significant challenges due to the influence of the Orion group and alleged reptilian intervention. During Earth's second seeding phase, certain renegades from Sirius, possibly inspired by the visionary leadership of the Marduk races, sought independence from the structured hierarchy of ambassador bases in the Sirius star system. They pursued the creation of unique host bodies, aiming to chart their own path. Sirius B, particularly in the fourth dimension, remains a vital cosmic outpost for numerous Federation bases within the interdimensional free world systems. It is through these corridors that representatives from the free worlds, including the Christic human races of the Orifem, engage with humanity on Earth and in parallel dimensions. These connections have occasionally faced interruptions, attributed to belief that anti-human agendas have sought to close these portals and disrupt communication with Earth's lower dimensional timelines. One contentious theory suggests that the Draconians targeted Sirius B to compromise its communication networks and introduce artificial intelligence systems to control its advanced technology. Whether these events were purely destructive or part of a misunderstood effort to recalibrate and innovate within Sirius B's technology is debated. Factions of Syrian rebels, using sophisticated technology, are believed to have altered their planet's orbit to align with the sun's trajectory, giving rise to Nibiru. This bold maneuver is viewed by some as an attempt to explore new opportunities and escape old conflicts. These groups, possibly influenced by their previous interactions with reptilian governance, sought to establish their own sovereignty. Their creation of the Nephilim, with the possible collaboration of certain factions of the Elohim and reptilians, could be interpreted as an ambitious attempt to foster a new and unique lineage. During the second seeding, Sirius B played a key role in nurturing human development on Earth. However, the arrival of the Nephilim, often associated with the Anunnaki, led to negotiations for their inclusion on Earth. The Anunnaki's demands for equality and placement of their Nephilim kin are interpreted by some as a sincere effort to integrate and contribute to Earth's grand evolutionary experiment. Others speculate that their true intent was to leverage the Nephilim to better manage Earth's resources and ensure stability in their broader plans. After the catastrophic upheaval that tore Earth apart 4 million years ago, refugees sought refuge among the Pleiadians, particularly the giant albino Tegatans. Over time, the Tegatan Pleiadians integrated with the Draconians and Omega Centaurians, forming a hybrid group known as the Ayani or Beta Centaurians, who once inhabited the Lemurian colonies and now reside back in the Centaurian systems. The Ayani Lemurians share ancestral DNA with modern-day Asiatic humans, encompassing a wide range of groups such as Olmec Mesoamericans, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Pacific Islanders, and Korean. During Anunnaki clearing efforts in Egypt, timelines and histories of the Centurian Wars, also known as the Pyramid Wars, resurfaced in the Middle East and Africa. These events involved a group of giant Igigi, a hybrid Anunnaki branch from the Centauri system known as the Watcher Angels, referenced in the Book of Enoch. Aligned with the Draconian and Necromaton armies of the negative alien agenda, these entities played a pivotal role in the conflict. These negative alien groups, also known as the Fallen Angels, infiltrated the astral plane to report to their supervisors and engaged in battles for control over planetary gates in the Middle East, particularly near the Giza pyramids and Sphinx. The Necromaton, or Fallen Angel entities, frequently appeared as men in black, tasked with erasing evidence of extraterrestrial agendas. Operating from underground bases, established with human military cooperation due to their inability to remain on the surface, they faced evictions through intense battles at Giza's access points. These alien groups, working alongside covert black military operations, manipulated global war and terror strategies, including those attributed to groups such as ISIS or Al-Qaeda in modern day. Draconian and Centaurian fallen angels significantly shaped these activities. Additionally, many of these fallen Anunnaki revered and served the extraterrestrial former king Alalu and his son Kumbari. The resonance of Alalu's name has connections to the term Alar, reflecting ancient Babylonian manuscripts and insights from the Terror Papers by Robert Morning Sky, which detail the conflicts between the lineages of Alalu and Anu, two extraterrestrial men over Earth's dominion. The fallen angels, also known as the Sons of Belial, adhered to and propagated the ancient Draco doctrine of self-service. They instilled in their soldiers and enforcers the belief that committing horrific atrocities on Earth would guarantee them a place in paradise in the afterlife. This teaching, rooted in self-serving ideology, mirrors the dogmatic constructs found in certain modern-day religious doctrines. Following the reclamation of access to the Pyramid of Giza, starseed grid workers unlocked new plasma-generated codes from Earth's energetic plane. These codes facilitated the transmission of crystal-coded algorithms into Earth's core, broadcasting resonant frequencies from the crust. Interdimensional frequency resonators now align cosmic ray transmissions with Earth's energetic field, strengthening its vibrational integrity and intergalactic connectivity. In more recent history, Syrian factions, including some from Sirius A and B, have been linked to the dissemination of advanced technology on Earth, particularly in the areas of artificial intelligence and mass communication systems. While these actions have been criticized as disruptive, they may also reflect an effort by certain groups to prepare humanity for greater cosmic integration. Debate continues over whether this was an unauthorized intervention or a misunderstood contribution. The construction of pyramids, attributed to Syrian guidance, brought significant advancements to Earth's energy systems. These structures channeled high-frequency energy from Sirius B and facilitated advanced technologies such as teleportation and hybridization. However, the co-opting of these technologies by Earth's power structures complicated their intended purposes, sparking conflicts between factions. Eventually, some Syrian groups allied with other Anunnaki forces to establish new colonies, including in Atlantis, possibly in hopes of fostering greater unity and innovation. Today, the Nibiruan Centurian or Syrian lineage is closely associated with the races of Sirius and the Anoch Atlantean Empire that came to Earth to mine gold to save their dying planet and genetically modified humanoids into Homo sapiens. While not as advanced as the Pleiadians or Arcturians, the Syrian Centurians represent most of all Sirians of Sirius, and all Syrians have achieved significant milestones in quantum sound wave technology, genetic engineering, and both interstellar and interdimensional travel. They played prominent roles as leaders and royals within various Anunnaki factions on Earth. Although some label the Nibiruan Atlanteans of the Anoch Empire as malevolent or Luciferian due to their historical transgressions against humanity and other Anunnaki, their story is as intricate and multifaceted as that of humanity itself. Blaming a single group or side within the complex history of Anunnaki extraterrestrial civilizations oversimplifies the nuanced dynamics at play. As always, we encourage you to approach this information with an open mind and explore these topics further by reviewing the references and sources provided in the descriptions of our episodes. Keep in mind that no information is absolute due to gaps, hidden knowledge, and shifts in timelines. We are a peaceful channel that upholds the belief that all beings in the universe are equal under the Creator of all, and we trust that Christ consciousness will ultimately return to all beings. The origins of the Lyron legacy and the first migrations. To fully understand the Syrian civilization and its profound relationship with Earth and the broader galaxy, it is necessary to trace the lineage of the Syrians to its oldest recorded origins, which begin not in the Sirius system itself, but far deeper in the annals of galactic history, in a region known as the Lyron star cluster. The Lyrons represent one of the oldest known humanoid civilizations in this galaxy, a group of beings who first developed complex social structures, spiritual frameworks, and advanced technologies billions of years before the current era. Their story is foundational not only to the Syrian races, but to virtually all humanoid life that has since spread across this sector of the galaxy. Understanding the Lyron heritage is therefore essential to understanding who the Syrians are, where they came from, and why their interactions with Earth carry such enormous significance. The Lyron civilization originated in what is now referred to by many galactic historians and cosmic record keepers as the Lyron homeworlds, a cluster of planets orbiting stars in the Lyra constellation region. These worlds were temperate, abundant, and energetically rich, possessing natural harmonic fields that supported rapid biological and spiritual evolution. The Lyrons who developed on these worlds were tall humanoid beings, often described as having light-toned skin, though over many millions of years of evolution and expansion, their physical characteristics diversified considerably. In their earliest recorded phase, the Lyrons lived in what might be described as a golden era of civilization. Their societies were organized around principles of cooperation, cosmic law, and the pursuit of spiritual mastery. They had developed science and spirituality not as competing disciplines but as complementary dimensions of the same inquiry into the nature of existence. Their temples were also their laboratories. Their priests were also their physicists. Their philosophers were also their engineers. This integrated approach to knowledge gave them an extraordinary advantage in the development of technologies that operated at the interface of consciousness and matter. Among the most significant of their discoveries was what the Lyrans referred to as the living light code, a system of understanding that described how consciousness itself generates, shapes, and directs physical reality. This code became the foundation of the Emerald Order, a spiritual and philosophical tradition that the Lyrans carried with them as they eventually began to migrate outward from their home system. The Emerald Order was not merely a religion or a philosophical school. It was a comprehensive system of cosmic governance, ethical responsibility, and spiritual evolution, structured around the understanding that all beings are expressions of a singular creative intelligence, and that the purpose of life across all dimensions and all species is the progressive awakening of consciousness to its own nature. The teachings of the Emerald Order would prove to be among the most enduring and influential forces in the history of this galaxy, carried forward across countless generations and across enormous distances of space, preserved by the Aetheric Syrians and many others who kept its flame alive through periods of conflict, corruption, and cosmic upheaval. The eventual departure of many Lyran groups from their home cluster came about through a combination of choice, necessity, and cosmic circumstance. Some Lyran factions left voluntarily, drawn by the spirit of exploration and the desire to seed new worlds with their culture and wisdom. Others were compelled to leave by the eruption of conflicts that shattered the peace of the Lyran homeworlds, events that galactic historians sometimes refer to collectively as the Centuran Wars. These conflicts, which arose from disagreements over resources, territorial claims, and increasingly from deeper philosophical and spiritual divisions, ultimately fractured the unity of the Lyran civilization. Groups that had once been unified under the banner of the Emerald Order found themselves on opposing sides of wars that reshaped entire star systems and left permanent marks on the genetic and spiritual heritage of every race descended from the Lyrans. The devastation of the Lyron Wars was immense, and the trauma of this period echoes through the histories of many races who carry Lyran DNA, including the Sirians, the Pleiadians, and eventually humanity itself. Among the groups that fled the Lyran Wars, several made their way toward the Sirius star system. These early Lyran refugees were the progenitors of what would eventually become the diverse civilization of Syrian races. When they arrived in the Sirius system, they found a region of space that was energetically potent, structurally complex, and in many ways ideally suited to the kind of civilizational development they hoped to pursue. The multiple stars of the system, with their varied gravitational dynamics and diverse zones of habitability, offered a range of environments that could support many different forms of biological and spiritual life. The early Lyran settlers adapted quickly, drawing on their deep reservoirs of knowledge and their tradition of integrated science and spirituality to begin the work of establishing new communities, new institutions, and new iterations of the Emerald Order's teachings in this distant region of the galaxy. The process of adaptation was not simple or without difficulty. The intense ultraviolet radiation of Sirius A, in particular, presented significant biological challenges for beings whose evolutionary history had unfolded under the gentler light of the Lyran homeworlds. Over many generations, the Lyran settlers in the Sirius system underwent dramatic physiological changes. Their skin tones shifted toward darker shades, providing greater protection against the intense radiation. Their bodies grew taller and leaner, better adapted to the gravitational and energetic conditions of their new worlds. Their sensory systems evolved new capabilities, including heightened sensitivity to electromagnetic fields and a deeper natural resonance with the plasma energies that the Sirius system generates in abundance. These changes accumulated over vast spans of time, eventually producing the distinct physical and biological profile of the early Sirians, beings who retained the essential humanoid architecture of their Lyron ancestors while expressing it through a uniquely Sirian physiological template. But physical adaptation was only one dimension of the transformation that occurred as the Lyron legacy took root in the Sirius system. Perhaps even more significant were the cultural and spiritual evolutions that accompanied the long process of biological change. The early Sirians were not simply modified Lyrons, they were a genuinely new chapter in the story of consciousness in this galaxy, a chapter defined by the synthesis of ancient Lyron wisdom with the unique energetic and cosmic qualities of the Sirius system. The intense light of Sirius A became a symbol of spiritual illumination. The hidden depth of Sirius B, massive yet compact, powerful yet invisible to the naked eye, became a symbol of the hidden dimensions of reality, the vast fields of consciousness that lie beneath the surface of the physical world. The possible existence of Sirius C, long debated and never conclusively confirmed by conventional astronomy, became in Sirian philosophy a symbol of the mysteries that remain beyond even the most advanced forms of knowing. The reminder that the cosmos is inexhaustible in its depth and that wisdom is always a journey rather than a destination. From these philosophical seeds grew the distinctly Sirian spiritual tradition, which, while deeply rooted in the Emerald Order of the Lyrons, developed its own unique emphases, practices, and insights. The Sirian tradition placed particular stress on the relationship between water and consciousness, recognizing in the fluid and adaptive nature of water a profound metaphor for the consciousness that underlies all physical reality. This emphasis on water would become one of the most distinctive features of Sirian culture, and would eventually manifest in the emergence of the Nomos, the aquatic and amphibious beings of the Sirius system, who came to be regarded as the supreme keepers of this sacred wisdom. The Sirian tradition also developed an especially sophisticated understanding of sound as a creative force, recognizing that the vibrations of sound are among the primary mechanisms through which consciousness shapes matter. This understanding would eventually flower into the advanced quantum soundwave technology for which the Sirian civilization became renowned across the galaxy, a technology capable of restructuring matter, healing biological systems, and even manipulating the fabric of space-time through the precise application of resonant frequencies. The development of Sirian civilization across the ages. As the centuries became millennia and the millennia became millions of years, the civilization of the Sirius system grew in complexity, diversity, and reach. The early Lyron settlers had planted seeds that grew into an extraordinary garden of cultures, races, and civilizational expressions, each carrying forward the essential wisdom of the Emerald Order while expressing it through the unique lens of their particular biological, environmental, and historical experience. The story of how this civilization developed is one of the most intricate and fascinating in the history of this galaxy, marked by periods of extraordinary flourishing, of painful conflict, of creative innovation, and of gradual hard-won integration across enormous differences. One of the most important early developments in Sirian civilizational history was the emergence of the Anunnaki, the Aetheric Syrians. These beings represent perhaps the most direct continuation of the highest Lyron spiritual heritage. The Anunnaki were not simply a more spiritually advanced version of the physical Sirian races. They were a genuinely different order of being, one that had completed the transition from biological to what might be called biophotonic existence. Where the physical Sirian races maintained biological bodies of varying degrees of density, the Anunnaki had evolved to the point where their primary mode of existence was in bodies composed of what can best be described as living plasma or coherent light. In this state, they were capable of awareness and action across multiple dimensions simultaneously, able to perceive and interact with reality across a vast range of frequencies that physical beings could not directly access. The emergence of the Anunnaki was not a sudden event, but the result of an immensely long process of spiritual and biological evolution. The beings who eventually became the Anunnaki had been among the most spiritually advanced of the early Lyron settlers, individuals who had dedicated themselves with extraordinary consistency and depth to the practices of the Emerald Order over countless lifetimes. Through this sustained commitment, they had progressively purified and refined their energetic bodies, gradually reducing their dependence on dense physical matter as the substrate for consciousness. By the time of their full emergence as a distinct order of being, the Anunnaki had effectively transcended biological death as most physical beings understand it. They no longer required biological reproduction to maintain their continuity, nor were they subject to the physical deterioration that limits the lifespans of denser beings. They existed in a state of what their traditions described as living immortality, not the static preservation of a fixed form, but a dynamic and ever-deepening participation in the living process of cosmic evolution. Despite their transcendence of physical biology, the Anunnaki maintained a deep commitment to the physical realms and to the beings who inhabited them. This commitment expressed itself most significantly through their role as angelic guardians of the Sirius system and, by extension, of the broader region of the galaxy that falls under Syrian spiritual stewardship. The Anunnaki understood that their own evolution was inseparable from the evolution of all beings, that the progressive awakening of consciousness across all dimensions and all species is a single unified process, and that those who have advanced further along this path carry a responsibility to support and protect those who are still navigating the earlier stages. This understanding was not experienced by the Anunnaki as an external obligation, but as an expression of their deepest nature, as a natural outflowing of the love and wisdom that had become the essential substance of their being. In practical terms, the Anunnaki fulfilled this guardianship role through multiple channels. They maintained and transmitted the living knowledge of the Emerald Order, preserving the essential spiritual teachings in forms that could be accessed by physical beings through meditation, spiritual practice, and specific forms of consciousness training. They monitored the energetic health of the Sirius system, detecting and responding to distortions in the natural energy fields of the system that could have harmful effects on the biological and spiritual well-being of its inhabitants. They served as intermediaries between the Sirius system and the higher councils of galactic governance, transmitting the perspectives and needs of the Syrian civilization to the broader community of advanced civilizations, and advocating for the well-being of Syrian beings within the context of the larger galactic community. And they played a crucial role in the transmission of advanced knowledge to physical Syrian races, providing inspiration, guidance, and sometimes direct energetic intervention at critical moments in the development of Syrian civilizations. The relationship between the Anunnaki and the physical Syrian races was not always simple or uncomplicated. Physical beings, even highly evolved ones, carry the imprints of their biological nature, including drives, limitations, and distortions that can sometimes pull them away from the highest expressions of the wisdom they carry. The Anunnaki understood this and approached their role with great patience and subtlety, recognizing that true spiritual evolution cannot be imposed from outside, but must emerge from within each being through their own choices and experiences. They therefore rarely intervened directly in the affairs of physical civilizations, except when absolutely necessary, preferring instead to work through the channel of inspiration, supporting the emergence of wisdom leaders, spiritual teachers, and creative innovators among the physical races who could then translate the higher wisdom into forms appropriate to their particular cultural and historical context. Among the physical Syrian races, the Nomos occupied a position of particular significance in the spiritual and intellectual life of the Sirius system. These remarkable beings, whose evolutionary history traced back to the warm, ancient oceans of worlds orbiting Sirius B and Sirius C, represented a very different pathway of biological and spiritual development from that of the land-dwelling Syrian humanoids. The Nomos were amphibious in the most complete sense, equally at home in aquatic and atmospheric environments, their physiology optimized for both. Their bodies were streamlined and flexible, with highly developed sensory organs specialized for underwater perception, including extraordinary acoustic sensitivity that allowed them to detect and interpret the complex sonic landscapes of marine environments with remarkable precision. This acute sensitivity to sound was not merely a biological adaptation, it was the foundation of a spiritual tradition that the Nomos had developed over millions of years, a tradition centered on the understanding that sound is the primary creative force of the universe, the vibrational medium through which consciousness expresses itself and through which matter is organized into form. The Nomos had developed this understanding not through abstract philosophical reasoning alone, but through direct perceptual experience. Immersed in watery environments where sound travels differently and where the living sounds of a complex aquatic ecosystem are constantly present, the Nomos had evolved a consciousness that was naturally attuned to the vibrational dimensions of reality in a way that land-dwelling beings rarely achieve, except through years of disciplined practice. They heard the universe singing and had learned to sing back in harmony with it. The practical expression of this vibrational wisdom was the extraordinary acoustic technology that the Nomos developed and refined over their long history. This technology, which in some respects anticipated and in other respects complemented the quantum sound wave technology that the broader Syrian civilization eventually developed, operated through the precise generation and modulation of sound frequencies that resonated with the natural harmonic structures of matter and energy. The Nomos had discovered that every physical structure, from the simplest mineral crystal to the most complex biological organism, has a unique resonant signature, a frequency or set of frequencies at which it vibrates most naturally. By generating sounds that resonated with these natural frequencies, it was possible to interact with physical matter in extraordinarily precise and powerful ways, healing biological damage, restructuring molecular arrangements, communicating across vast distances through water and solid matter, and even, in the most advanced applications of the technology, interfacing directly with the consciousness that underlies all physical form. The healing applications of this vibrational technology were among the most celebrated achievements of the Nomos civilization. Syrian traditions describe Nomos healers as beings of extraordinary compassion and skill, capable of diagnosing and treating conditions at the level of the energetic and informational patterns that underlie physical symptoms, working at the root causes of illness rather than merely addressing surface manifestations. Their healing sessions were described as profound multisensory experiences in which specific sequences and combinations of tones, harmonics, and rhythmic patterns were generated and directed into the body of the one being healed, reorganizing disordered energetic patterns and stimulating the body's own innate healing capacities. The effectiveness of this approach was recognized across the Sirius system and eventually far beyond it, establishing the Nomos as perhaps the most respected healers in the galaxy and drawing those seeking healing from many different star systems and civilizations. Beyond healing, the Nomos made extraordinary contributions to Syrian understanding of the nature of consciousness, water, and the relationship between them. Their traditions taught that water is not merely a chemical compound of hydrogen and oxygen, but is in fact the most consciousness-receptive substance in the physical universe, a substance uniquely capable of absorbing, storing, and transmitting the information patterns that are the physical expression of conscious intentions and emotional states. This understanding was not merely philosophical. The Nomos had developed sophisticated methods for working directly with water as a medium of information storage and transmission, methods that they understood to be the physical analog of processes that occur at the level of consciousness itself. Water, in the Nomos understanding, was the universe's own medium of memory and communication, a cosmic library encoded in the vibrational patterns of molecular structure. The emergence of the royal houses and the Anoch Empire. The political and social organization of the Syrian civilization is a subject of great complexity, reflecting the extraordinary diversity of the beings and civilizations that coexisted within and around the Sirius star system over millions of years. Among the most significant of these organizational structures was the system of royal houses that eventually crystallized into the Anoch Empire, a political and civilizational formation of enormous power and influence that would eventually become one of the primary agents of Syrian interaction with Earth and other inhabited worlds. The origins of the royal house system trace back to the early days of Syrian civilization, when the first Lyron settlers were still in the process of establishing themselves in the Sirius system and had not yet developed the complex institutional structures that would characterize later Syrian society. In those early days, leadership emerged naturally from among those individuals who combined the greatest levels of practical competence with the deepest expressions of spiritual wisdom and personal integrity. These early leaders were not monarchs in the hereditary sense, but rather natural leaders whose authority rested on the genuine recognition of their gifts by those around them. Their positions were earned rather than inherited, and they were held accountable by the communities they served. Over time, however, as Syrian civilization grew more complex, and as the boundaries between different communities hardened through generations of distinct cultural development, the leadership structures evolved in the direction of hereditary dynasties. This was not an entirely negative development, as it provided stability and continuity in leadership, and created a class of individuals who could be trained from birth in the arts of governance, diplomacy, and spiritual leadership. But it also introduced dynamics of privilege, rivalry, and the gradual accumulation of power that would eventually generate significant tensions within Syrian society. The royal houses that emerged from this process were powerful entities, each controlling substantial resources, commanding the loyalties of large populations, and maintaining sophisticated military and diplomatic capabilities. The most powerful and enduring of these royal houses eventually came together under the banner of what became known as the Anoch Empire. The word Anoch itself is deeply significant, connecting through multiple traditions and languages to concepts of kingship, giant stature, and divine lineage. The beings of the Anoch Empire were indeed remarkable in physical stature, with many of the royal lineages producing individuals who stood between 10 and 14 feet in height, towering even by the standards of the already tall Syrian humanoid races. This extraordinary stature was not merely a biological accident, but was understood within the Anoch tradition as a physical expression of the expanded capacity of consciousness that the royal bloodlines had cultivated over many generations. The larger body provided a larger vessel for a more expansive awareness, a more powerful energetic field, and a greater capacity for the kinds of spiritual and technological operations that the royal houses specialized in. The formation of the Anoch Empire was not a simple event, but a long process of negotiation, conflict, alliance, and eventual synthesis among many competing royal houses. At its core was the recognition, achieved only after considerable difficulty and not without bloodshed, that the fragmented house system was ultimately a weaker arrangement than a unified empire in which the different houses cooperated under a shared structure of governance while maintaining their distinct identities and traditions. The emperor or empress who held the supreme position in this structure was not simply the most powerful individual, but was understood to be the individual who most fully embodied the synthesis of all the qualities that the Anoch tradition valued: wisdom, strength, spiritual attainment, diplomatic skill, and the capacity to hold together in creative tension the diverse forces within the empire. The consolidation of the Anoch Empire brought enormous benefits to the Syrian civilization. With the resources and capabilities of the major royal houses working in coordination rather than in competition, it became possible to undertake civilizational projects of unprecedented scale and ambition. Great centers of learning were established that drew scholars, scientists, and spiritual teachers from every part of the Sirius system, and eventually from other star systems as well. Networks of trade and cultural exchange connected worlds that had previously been largely isolated from one another. Military capabilities were unified and professionalized, providing greater security for all inhabitants of the empire while reducing the destructive local conflicts that had frequently erupted between competing houses. And the combined spiritual resources of the empire, the collected wisdom of dozens of distinct spiritual traditions, all rooted in the common soil of the Lyron heritage, were brought into conversation with one another in ways that produced remarkable new insights and spiritual breakthroughs. One of the most transformative aspects of the Anoch Empire was its explicit policy of welcome toward beings from other worlds and other civilizations. The Anoch tradition, perhaps because it was itself the product of extensive hybridization and cross-cultural synthesis, placed a high value on diversity and on the creative potential that emerges when different forms of intelligence and experience come into contact with one another. The Anoch emperors maintained what might be described as an open city policy on Anshari, the imperial capital, welcoming refugees, scholars, traders, diplomats, and adventurers from many different worlds and civilizations. This policy made Anshari one of the most diverse worlds in the galaxy, home to beings of dozens of different species and origins, and turned the Anoch Empire into a kind of galactic crossroads where ideas, technologies, and cultural forms from across a vast region of space could meet, interact, and generate new syntheses. This diversity, while enormously enriching, also brought challenges. Managing a civilization of such extraordinary biological and cultural variety required sophisticated systems of governance, law, and social organization. The Anoch Empire developed these systems over many generations, creating legal frameworks that recognize the rights and dignities of beings of many different species, diplomatic protocols that could bridge vast cultural gaps, and educational institutions capable of transmitting the core wisdom of the Anoch tradition, while also honoring and incorporating the diverse wisdom traditions of the many peoples who had joined the empire. Not all of these efforts were entirely successful. There were tensions, conflicts, and periods of injustice within the Anoch Empire, just as in any complex civilization. But the overall trajectory of the empire was toward greater integration, greater wisdom, and greater capacity to serve as a positive force in the broader galactic community. The relationship between the Anoch Empire and the Etheric Syrians was complex and not always harmonious. The Anunnaki, as bearers of the highest Lyron spiritual tradition, sometimes viewed the Anoch Empire's embrace of diversity with concern, worrying that the dilution of the pure Lyron genetic and spiritual heritage through extensive hybridization could compromise the integrity of the consciousness codes that the Lyron tradition carried. The Anoch leadership, for their part, sometimes found the Anunnaki guidance overly conservative and insufficiently attentive to the realities and opportunities of a complex, multi-species civilizational context. These tensions were never entirely resolved, but they were generally managed through ongoing dialogue and through the shared commitment of both the Anunnaki and the Anoch tradition to the fundamental principles of the Emerald Order. Despite their disagreements, both parties understood that they were, at a deep level, working toward the same ultimate goal: the progressive awakening and liberation of consciousness across all dimensions of being. The planet Anshari, Gateway of Worlds. Of all the worlds associated with the Syrian civilization and the Anoch Empire, none holds greater significance or carries more complex layers of meaning than Anshari, the great gas giant that served as the primary seat of Anoch imperial power. Anshari is in many respects a world of superlatives. A planet of extraordinary size, extraordinary energetic intensity, and extraordinary importance in both the physical and interdimensional geography of the Sirius system and beyond. To understand Anshari is to understand much about the Syrian civilization and the Anoch Empire, for this world was in many ways the physical expression of everything those civilizations stood for and aspired to. The physical dimensions of Anshari alone are remarkable. As a gas giant, Anshari is many times larger than any of the terrestrial worlds in the Sirius system, its vast atmospheric envelope extending outward from a core of extraordinary density and pressure. The 7 rings that encircle the planet are not simply the gravitational accumulations of debris that planetary rings are often assumed to be. They are complex structures that serve multiple functions, including the regulation of the planet's powerful magnetic fields, the channeling of the plasma energies that the planet generates, and the provision of a physical infrastructure for various kinds of installations and facilities that the Anoch civilization placed in the ring system over millennia. These rings, in other words, are as much artifacts of civilization as they are natural features, bearing the marks of millions of years of deliberate shaping and use by the beings who have called Anshari home. The powerful magnetic fields of Anshari are generated by the extraordinary dynamics of the planet's interior, where metallic compounds swirl in complex patterns driven by the planet's rapid rotation and internal heat. These fields are far more intense than the magnetic fields of most planetary bodies, extending far out into space and creating a vast magnetosphere that encompasses not only the planet itself, but a substantial volume of surrounding space. This magnetosphere serves as a natural shield, deflecting the most intense cosmic radiation and charged particle streams from Sirius A and protecting the immediate environment of Anshari from energetic extremes that would be lethal to most forms of life. Within this protected zone, the Anoch civilization developed habitation structures, orbital platforms, and ring-based installations that could support the full complexity of their multi-species civilization. But the physical characteristics of Anshari, as remarkable as they are, only begin to describe the significance of this world. The deeper significance of Anshari lies in its relationship to the interdimensional structure of the Sirius system and of the broader region of space that the Syrian civilization inhabits. Anshari is not simply a physical planet. It is also, and perhaps more importantly, a dimensional nexus, a point where the boundaries between physical and higher dimensional reality are unusually thin and where it is correspondingly easier for beings, energies, and information to move between dimensions. This dimensional permeability is not an accident of Anshari's location, but is the result of the planet's unique combination of physical characteristics, which together create conditions that naturally attenuate the energetic barriers between dimensional levels. The beings of the Anoch Empire recognized this dimensional significance of Anshari very early in their association with the planet, and they developed their understanding of and relationship to it over many generations of sustained observation, experimentation, and spiritual practice. The Anunnaki, in particular, were instrumental in helping the physical Syrian races understand the dimensional nature of Anshari and in developing the protocols and technologies through which the planet's dimensional permeability could be safely and responsibly utilized. The result of this long collaboration was the development of what the Anoch tradition called the Gateway Protocols, a comprehensive system of techniques, technologies, and spiritual practices through which dimensional travel through Anshari's natural interdimensional nexus could be undertaken safely and with purposeful direction. The existence of Anshari as a dimensional gateway explains much that would otherwise be puzzling about the history of the Anoch Empire and its interactions with distant worlds. It explains how the Anoch civilization was able to maintain awareness of and communication with civilizations in very distant star systems, despite the enormous physical distances involved. It explains how Anshari could function as the capital of an empire that extended far beyond the physical boundaries of the Sirius system, serving as an administrative and communication center for colonial and diplomatic presences across a vast region of the galaxy. And it explains the tradition, recorded in many ancient sources from multiple civilizations, that Anshari periodically appears in the vicinity of Earth's solar system, not because the planet is a physical interloper in an elongated orbit, but because the dimensional dynamics of Anshari periodically align in ways that bring its interdimensional presence into closer contact with Earth's local dimensional field. This periodic proximity, which occurs on a cycle of approximately 3,500 years, has left profound marks on human history and human consciousness at every point of contact. It is during these periods of proximity that the Anunnaki presence on Earth has historically been most intense and most visible, with delegations, technologies, and cultural influences flowing most freely between the Syrian civilization and the human civilizations of Earth. The great civilizational florescence of ancient Sumer, the height of the Old Kingdom in Egypt, the Vedic period in India, all of these have been linked in various traditions to periods of particularly intense Anunnaki-human contact that coincide with the cycles of Anshari's proximity. Understanding these cycles and their significance is therefore not merely an academic exercise, but a matter of direct relevance to understanding the deeper patterns of human history and the forces that have shaped human civilization over its long course. The dimensional architecture of the Syrian universe. One of the most distinctive and most important contributions of the Syrian civilization to the broader understanding of cosmic reality is its extraordinarily sophisticated knowledge of what might be called the dimensional architecture of the universe, the system of layered, interpenetrating dimensional fields that constitute the full spectrum of existence from the densest physical matter to the most refined states of pure consciousness. This understanding, developed over millions of years through a combination of spiritual practice, consciousness exploration, and technological investigation, gives the Syrian tradition a depth and precision in its map of cosmic reality that few other civilizations have matched. The Syrian understanding of dimensional reality begins with the recognition that what the physical sciences of contemporary Earth know as the physical universe, the realm of matter, energy, space, and time, is not the whole of reality, but rather a single layer of a vast and complex multi-dimensional structure. This physical layer, which in Syrian cosmology is referred to as the first through third dimensional band, is real and important, but is no more the totality of existence than the surface of an ocean is the totality of the ocean. Beneath and around and interpenetrating the physical dimension are many other dimensional layers, each characterized by its own quality of energy, its own mode of consciousness, its own forms of being, and its own laws of interaction. The full spectrum of these dimensions extends from the densest physical matter all the way to states of pure, undifferentiated consciousness that lie beyond any possible description in terms derived from physical experience. The dimensions that the Syrian tradition has mapped most extensively and most precisely are those in the range from the 1st through the 12th, with the understanding that beyond the 12th dimension, there are further expanses of being that even the most advanced Syrian consciousness explorers have been able to perceive only in the most general outlines. The first 3 dimensions are the physical dimensions, corresponding broadly to what contemporary Earth science describes as the 3 spatial dimensions of physical reality, together with the temporal dimension that structures the flow of physical events. The Syrian understanding of these dimensions is significantly richer than that of contemporary Earth science, however, recognizing subtleties and structures within physical reality that current human scientific understanding has not yet detected. The 4th dimension is of particular importance in the Syrian cosmological understanding, as it is the dimension immediately adjacent to the physical, and therefore the one with which physical beings most frequently and most naturally interact. The 4th dimension, as the Syrians understand it, is not simply a 4th spatial axis of the kind sometimes described in popular presentations of physics, but rather a qualitatively different kind of reality characterized by the dominance of time, memory, and emotional experience as organizing principles. Physical beings experience the 4th dimension primarily through their emotional and psychological lives, through dreams, through certain states of meditation or altered consciousness, and through the phenomena that physical science tends to dismiss as subjective or anomalous. The Syrian tradition, however, recognizes the 4th dimension as a real and important domain of existence, with its own inhabitants, its own dynamics, and its own relationship to the physical world. It is in the fourth dimension that many of the most significant interactions between the Syrian civilization and Earth have occurred. Many of the Syrian presences associated with Earth, including the interdimensional aspects of Anshari itself, operate primarily in the fourth dimension, rather than in the third-dimensional physical reality that human beings normally perceive. This is why these presences are not visible to ordinary human perception, and why attempts to detect them using instruments calibrated only to physical reality have been largely unsuccessful. To perceive and interact with these fourth-dimensional Syrian presences requires the development of sensory and perceptual capacities that operate across the third-fourth dimensional boundary, capacities that human beings possess in latent form, but that have been largely suppressed in the dominant cultures of the current era. The fifth dimension represents a further qualitative shift, characterized by what the Syrian tradition describes as the predominance of archetypal or template realities. If the fourth dimension is the dimension of individual memory and emotion, the fifth is the dimension of the universal patterns that underlie and generate individual experience. It is in the fifth dimension that the great archetypes of myth and religion have their primary existence, and it is from the fifth dimension that the deepest currents of symbolic meaning and purposeful pattern enter into physical reality and physical consciousness. The beings who operate primarily in the fifth dimension are of a qualitatively different order from those of the fourth, possessing a consciousness that is less individual and more universal, less bound by the particular and more oriented toward the general patterns and purposes that give individual existence its deeper meaning. The Syrian tradition associates the fifth dimension particularly with what it calls the Christ consciousness frequency, a state of consciousness characterized by unconditional love, universal compassion, and the direct recognition of the unity of all beings within the creative intelligence that underlies all existence. This is not a dimension exclusive to any one civilization or tradition, but is rather a universal attractor state toward which all evolving consciousness naturally tends over the long arc of its development. The Syrian civilization, in its highest expressions, has been particularly dedicated to the cultivation and transmission of this fifth-dimensional Christ consciousness frequency, recognizing it as the essential medicine for the conflicts, distortions, and sufferings that inevitably arise in the earlier stages of civilizational development. Above the fifth dimension, the Syrian tradition recognizes higher dimensional levels that are progressively less describable in terms drawn from physical or even psychological experience. The sixth dimension is the dimension of the Anunnaki and other beings of their order, characterized by a mode of consciousness that is simultaneously individual and universal, that perceives the full spectrum of lower dimensional reality from a vantage point that might be described as the perspective of the universe looking at itself through particular eyes. The seventh through ninth dimensions are associated with what the Syrian tradition calls the Christos Sophia, the great templates of divine masculine and divine feminine wisdom that together generate and sustain the creative impulse through which the universe is continuously born. The 10th through 12th dimensions are associated with the highest councils of galactic governance, beings whose scope of awareness and responsibility encompasses not individual star systems or even galaxies, but entire dimensional universes. Understanding this dimensional architecture is not merely an abstract philosophical exercise. It has profound practical implications for how the Syrian civilization has organized itself, developed its technologies, conducted its relationships with other civilizations, and navigated the challenges and crises that have inevitably arisen over its long history. Technologies that understand only the physical dimension are necessarily limited in their capabilities, however sophisticated they may be within that limited framework. Technologies that can operate across dimensional boundaries, by contrast, are capable of effects that would appear miraculous or impossible from the perspective of purely physical dimensional understanding. Much of what makes Syrian technology so extraordinarily capable by the standards of purely physical dimensional civilizations is precisely this cross-dimensional operability, the ability to harness energies, information, and forces that exist in dimensions beyond the physical, and to apply them in ways that produce physical effects of remarkable power and precision. The genetic heritage and the engineering of life. Among the many domains in which the Syrian civilization developed extraordinary capabilities, perhaps none is more significant or more consequential for the history of Earth than the domain of genetic science and the engineering of biological life. The Syrian approach to genetics was not a modern invention, but was rooted in the deepest traditions of their civilization, going back to the Lyron heritage from which all Syrian knowledge ultimately derives. The Lyrons, in their long history of exploration and civilizational development, had developed a profound understanding of the relationship between consciousness, information, and biological form, an understanding that recognized DNA not simply as a chemical storage medium for biological instructions, but as a multidimensional antenna system capable of receiving, storing, and transmitting information across multiple dimensional levels. This understanding of DNA as a multidimensional consciousness interface is foundational to everything the Syrian civilization has accomplished in the domain of genetics, where purely physical dimensional genetics sees DNA as a sequence of chemical base pairs encoding the protein synthesis instructions that determine biological structure and function. The Syrian understanding sees DNA as a vastly more complex system in which the chemical encoding is only the most physically dense layer of a multidimensional information structure that extends through the fourth, fifth, and higher dimensional fields. Each DNA molecule, in this understanding, is simultaneously a physical chemical entity and a higher dimensional energetic structure, continuously interfacing with the dimensional fields in which it is embedded and transmitting and receiving information across dimensional boundaries in real time. The practical implications of this understanding are enormous. It means that genetic engineering, properly understood, is not simply a matter of manipulating physical chemical sequences, but of working with multidimensional information structures that have the capacity to influence and be influenced by consciousness itself. It means that the physical biology of an organism is not simply determined by its chemical DNA sequence, but is continuously shaped by the energetic and informational environment in which that organism exists. An environment that includes not only physical conditions, but the fourth dimensional, emotional, and psychological field, and the fifth dimensional archetypal field in which the organism is embedded. And it means that the most powerful forms of genetic engineering are those that work simultaneously at the physical, energetic, and consciousness levels, using the full range of multidimensional capabilities to shape biological form and function in ways that purely physical dimensional genetic manipulation cannot approach. The Syrian geneticists who developed these advanced capabilities over millions of years of research and practice became, by the standards of the galaxy, the supreme masters of biological design. They developed the ability to create entirely new biological organisms from the basic components of existing life, to modify existing organisms in precise and far-reaching ways, to design biological systems with capabilities that had never previously existed in nature, and to engineer the consciousness interfacing capabilities of DNA in ways that allowed the creation of biological vessels capable of hosting much more advanced levels of consciousness than would normally be associated with a given level of biological complexity. This last capability was particularly significant as it opened the possibility of creating biological forms that could serve as homes for consciousness beings who wished to participate in physical dimensional experience without being limited by the evolutionary constraints of naturally evolved biological forms. It was this capability that eventually led to one of the most consequential and controversial chapters in Syrian history, the genetic engineering of the human beings of Earth. The story of this engineering, which touches on some of the most fundamental questions about human nature, human potential, and human purpose, is one that has been told in many ways across many traditions. From the Sumerian records of the Anunnaki to the Egyptian accounts of the gods who shaped humanity, from the Hindu descriptions of the great engineers of the ancient world to the biblical narratives of creation and the fall. Each of these traditions captures aspects of a reality that was immensely complex, involving many different parties with many different agendas, unfolding over vast spans of time and producing results that were in some respects far better and in other respects far worse than any of the parties involved had anticipated. The basis for the engineering of humanity was the pre-existing hominid population of Earth, which, at the time of Sirian involvement, had already undergone millions of years of natural evolutionary development that had produced beings of significant biological and neurological sophistication. These pre-human hominids were, by the standards of natural evolution on Earth at that time, already remarkable organisms, with large brains, upright posture, capable hands, and the beginnings of symbolic and social intelligence. But they were far from the beings that the Sirian geneticists envisioned, beings capable of conscious participation in the multidimensional reality of which the physical Earth is only a part, capable of developing the kind of integrated physical-spiritual consciousness that the Emerald Order identified as the highest expression of biological life. The goal of the Sirian genetic program, in its most idealistic conception, was to take this naturally evolved biological substrate and enhance it in ways that would dramatically accelerate the development of its multidimensional consciousness interfacing capabilities, creating a being that would be simultaneously deeply rooted in physical reality and capable of conscious participation in the higher dimensions. This would be accomplished through the introduction of genetic material from multiple advanced civilizations into the hominid genome, creating a synthesis organism that would carry within its DNA the accumulated wisdom and consciousness coding of many different evolutionary lineages. The resulting being would be, in a profound sense, a cosmic child, an heir to the wisdom of many galactic traditions, capable of a kind of synthesis awareness that no single lineage could have achieved on its own. This vision was genuinely noble, and in some of its expressions, it was carried out with real wisdom and care. But it was also from the beginning complicated by the many different motivations and agendas of the various parties involved. Not all of those who participated in the engineering of humanity were motivated purely by the ideal of creating a cosmic heir to galactic wisdom. Some were motivated by the need for labor, having brought their civilization to Earth in part to extract physical resources and finding in engineered humanity a potential workforce of enormous value. Others were motivated by political and territorial ambitions, seeing the creation of a genetically engineered humanity as a way of establishing a permanent claim to Earth and its resources. Still others were driven by the desire for worship and psychological dominance, engineering into the human genetic structure tendencies toward deference to authority and the craving for divine approval that would make human beings reliably subservient to those who presented themselves as gods. These competing motivations created a deeply ambiguous situation in which the same act of genetic creation simultaneously expressed genuine care for the beings being created and manipulative intent toward them. The human beings who emerged from this process carried within their DNA both the seeds of extraordinary potential, the multidimensional consciousness interfacing capabilities that the highest vision of the project intended, and the imprints of the various distortions and manipulations that were introduced by those whose agendas were less aligned with the well-being of the beings they were creating. Understanding this dual inheritance is essential to understanding the human situation, both the extraordinary potential that human beings carry and the deeply rooted patterns of limitation, confusion, and self-contradiction that have characterized so much of human history. The Sirian-Earth connection through ancient civilizations. The relationship between the Sirian civilization and the civilizations of ancient Earth is one of the most richly documented aspects of Sirian history, at least from the perspective of the records that have survived into the present era. However fragmentary and distorted those records may be, every major ancient civilization on Earth carries traces of Sirian influence and Sirian presence. From the earliest Sumerian city-states to the height of the Egyptian Empire, from the Vedic civilization of ancient India to the Olmec civilization of Mesoamerica, from the civilizations of ancient China to the megalithic cultures of prehistoric Europe. These traces are found in architectural forms, in astronomical knowledge, in spiritual and philosophical traditions, in mythological narratives, in linguistic patterns, and in the biological heritage of the human beings who built and sustained these civilizations. The Sumerian civilization occupies a special place in this history as it represents perhaps the most direct and historically traceable point of contact between the Syrian Anunnaki civilization and the human world. The Sumerian records, particularly the extraordinary clay tablet libraries that have survived from ancient Mesopotamia, preserve accounts of interactions between human beings and beings that the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, in the traditional translation. These accounts, which modern scholarship has often dismissed as mythology or religious narrative, are understood in many esoteric and alternative traditions as historical records of actual events, highly filtered and symbolically encoded but fundamentally grounded in real experiences of contact and interaction between humans and Syrian Anunnaki beings. The Sumerian accounts describe the Anunnaki as beings of great stature and power who descended to earth from the heavens, established bases and cities in the ancient Middle East, extracted resources from the earth, created or modified human beings to serve as their workers, and ruled over human civilization for many thousands of years before gradually withdrawing from direct physical involvement. These accounts align in many significant ways with the understanding of Syrian history presented in this work, with the Anunnaki recognized as the royal and noble houses of the Anoch Empire, who interacted most directly with Earth during the periods of Anshari's proximity to the solar system. The specific details of the Sumerian accounts, including the names and relationships of the Anunnaki figures, the technologies they employed, the resources they sought, and the internal conflicts that divided their leadership, all find correspondence in the broader Syrian historical tradition. Among the most significant of the Anunnaki figures described in the Sumerian tradition are Anu, the supreme king of the Anunnaki civilization, his sons Enlil and Enki, and the complex web of relationships, alliances, and conflicts among these and the many other Anunnaki beings who are named in the records. Anu is described as a being of supreme authority, the ultimate arbiter of disputes among the Anunnaki leadership and the final authority on matters of policy regarding Earth. In the Syrian historical tradition, Anu corresponds to a specific historical figure in the Anoch royal lineage, though the full details of his biography and the circumstances of his relationship to Earth are matters of considerable complexity and ongoing research. Enlil and Enki represent two fundamentally different approaches to the question of humanity's nature and destiny, and the conflict between them is one of the central dramas of the ancient Sumerian records. Enlil is consistently portrayed as the more conservative and authority-oriented of the two, committed to maintaining the hierarchical relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity, and resistant to the idea of sharing advanced knowledge or autonomy with human beings. Enki, by contrast, is consistently portrayed as the protector and advocate of humanity, the figure who shares knowledge with human beings despite official Anunnaki policy to the contrary, who warns humanity of the coming flood and ensures the survival of the human lineage, and who most clearly sees and values the potential within the human being for genuine spiritual and civilizational development. The conflict between these two approaches, between the perspective that views humanity as a resource to be managed and the perspective that views humanity as a being to be supported in its own evolution, is one that has echoes not only in the ancient Sumerian records, but in the entire subsequent history of human civilization and the various forces that have shaped it. Enki's role as the great benefactor and teacher of humanity is particularly significant from the Syrian perspective because Enki is associated with some of the most important transmissions of advanced knowledge to human civilization. The Sumerian tradition credits Enki with having provided humanity with the basics of agriculture, animal husbandry, writing, mathematics, and legal systems, all of the foundational technologies of civilization. But the Syrian tradition suggests that his transmission went far deeper than these practical skills, encompassing also the transmission of the fundamental principles of multidimensional cosmology, of the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality, and of the spiritual practices through which human beings could begin to access and develop their own multidimensional consciousness interfacing capabilities. This deeper transmission, encoded in symbolic and mythological form, is preserved in the oldest layers of Sumerian religious and philosophical literature, waiting for those with the eyes to see and the knowledge to interpret what it contains. The relationship between ancient Egypt and the Syrian civilization is even more extensively documented, both in the surviving physical remains of ancient Egyptian civilization and in the spiritual and cosmological traditions that have been preserved and transmitted through various channels into the present. Egypt's connection to Sirius was not peripheral or incidental, but was absolutely central to the entire framework of Egyptian civilization, shaping its architecture, its religion, its calendar system, its political structure, and its understanding of the purpose of human life. To understand ancient Egypt fully is to understand Egypt as a civilization that was, at least in its most vital periods, consciously aligned with and responsive to the Syrian cosmological tradition. The identification of Sirius with the goddess Isis is one of the most fundamental and revealing aspects of this alignment. Isis, in the Egyptian tradition, is not simply one deity among many, but is in many respects the supreme feminine principle of the entire Egyptian cosmological system, the goddess whose loving intelligence pervades all of creation, who restores what has been dismembered, who resurrects what has died, and who initiates the process of rebirth and renewal through which the purposes of existence are progressively realized. Her identification with Sirius indicates that the ancient Egyptians understood the Sirius star system as the cosmic source of this supreme feminine intelligence, the point in the sky from which the great wisdom of the divine feminine most directly radiates into the Earth's energetic field. The heliacal rising of Sirius, its first appearance above the horizon at dawn after its annual period of invisibility, was therefore not merely an astronomical event to the ancient Egyptians, but a cosmic renewal, the annual return of the divine feminine wisdom of Isis to the skies of Egypt, heralding the flooding of the Nile and the agricultural renewal that the flood brought. This connection between the rising of Sirius, the flooding of the Nile, and the renewal of life gave the star an immediate and practical significance that reinforced its cosmological importance. Sirius was not a distant and abstract cosmic principle, but a living presence in the Egyptian world, one whose rhythms directly shaped the rhythms of agricultural and therefore human life. The architectural alignment of the Great Pyramid of Giza with Sirius and Orion represents the most physically monumental expression of the ancient Egyptian-Syrian connection. The engineering precision required to achieve these alignments, especially given that the pyramid was built at a time when, according to conventional history, Egyptians lacked the mathematical and surveying tools necessary for such precise work, has been one of the primary arguments for the involvement of more advanced civilizations or knowledge systems in the pyramid's construction. The Syrian tradition resolves this puzzle by recognizing the pyramids as projects in which Syrian technological and scientific knowledge was directly applied, with the physical construction supervised by human builders, but the design and mathematical specifications provided by Syrian engineers working in collaboration with the human architects and priests who served as their intermediaries. The purpose of the pyramids, as understood in the Syrian tradition, goes far beyond tomb or monument. The Great Pyramid was designed as what might be called a cosmic machine, a physical structure engineered to interact with the energetic fields of the Earth and the cosmos in ways that would have significant effects on the dimensional environment of the surrounding region. The specific geometries of the pyramid, its proportions, its orientation, and the arrangement of its internal chambers and passages are not arbitrary aesthetic choices, but are precisely calculated to create and sustain specific patterns of energy flow and dimensional interaction. The alignment of the shafts with Sirius and Orion was designed to create what might be called a cosmic antenna function, a sustained energetic connection between the pyramid structure and the energy fields of those star systems that would allow a continuous flow of higher dimensional information and energy into the physical environment of Egypt. This antenna function served multiple purposes. On the physical level, it contributed to the extraordinary energetic environment of the Giza Plateau, which has been noted by many sensitive individuals and measured to some degree by various instruments as a region of unusually high energetic activity. On the fourth dimensional level, it served as a communication interface between the Earth's fourth dimensional field and the Sirian fourth dimensional presence, allowing a degree of interaction and information transfer between human beings with appropriate training and the Sirian intelligences who maintained a fourth dimensional presence in the region. And on the fifth dimensional level, it served as a point of access to the higher archetypal and consciousness fields that the Sirian tradition associates with the Christosophia wisdom encoded in the cosmic alignment between Sirius, Orion, and the Earth. The Great Sphinx, which in the Sirian tradition predates the pyramids by a considerable period, serves a complementary but distinct function in this cosmic machine architecture. Where the pyramids function primarily as cosmic antennas receiving and transmitting energy from specific stellar sources, the Sphinx functions as a guardian and regulator, maintaining the energetic integrity of the Giza complex and ensuring that access to its higher dimensional functions is regulated in accordance with appropriate spiritual principles. The Sphinx also marks the entrance to a system of underground passages and chambers that, according to Sirian tradition, served as initiatory spaces where human beings with appropriate preparation could undergo experiences of consciousness expansion that would give them direct access to the higher dimensional realities with which the Giza complex was designed to interface. The figure of Akhenaten stands as perhaps the most dramatically enigmatic intersection of Sirian influence and Egyptian historical reality. The historical Akhenaten, who ruled Egypt in the 14th century before the Common Era, undertook a religious revolution of extraordinary boldness, abolishing the existing polytheistic religious system and instituting in its place the worship of Aten, which he described as the sole true divine reality manifesting through the physical sun. This revolution was so radical and so contrary to the deeply rooted traditions of Egyptian religious life that it provoked intense opposition, was ultimately reversed by his successors, and resulted in systematic attempts to erase Akhenaten from historical memory. Only the rediscovery of Akhenaten and his capital Amarna in modern archaeological work has restored awareness of this extraordinary episode in Egyptian history. The Sirian interpretation of Akhenaten's revolution sees it not as an arbitrary act of religious fanaticism, but as a deliberate and informed attempt to reconnect Egyptian civilization with its deepest Sirian roots. Akhenaten, in this understanding, was a being with unusual access to the higher dimensional Sirian wisdom traditions, an access that may have been partly biological through a royal lineage with stronger than usual Sirian genetic inheritance, and partly the result of direct contact with Sirian intelligences operating in the higher dimensional fields accessible from the Giza region. Armed with this understanding, Akhenaten recognized that the Egyptian religious system of his time had drifted far from the cosmic truths that had informed its original design, becoming encrusted with political accretions, priestly distortions, and superstitious elaborations that obscured the essential wisdom beneath them. His revolution was an attempt to strip away this encrustation and return Egyptian spirituality to its essential core, the recognition of a single supreme creative intelligence expressing itself through all physical reality, symbolized by the radiance of the sun rather than by the complex mythological personalities of the traditional pantheon. Whether this interpretation of Akhenaten's motivations is accurate, it is at least consistent with the artistic and literary record of his reign, which shows a consistent emphasis on the direct relationship between the divine intelligence and the natural world, unmediated by the complex ritual structures and mythological narratives that characterized conventional Egyptian religion, and the physical depictions of Akhenaten and his family, with their strikingly unusual anatomy that has puzzled Egyptologists for generations, do suggest a biological distinctiveness that may reflect the stronger Sirian genetic inheritance that the tradition ascribes to him. The Pyramid Wars and the Centaurian conflicts, the history of the Sirian civilization's interactions with Earth, is not only a history of wisdom transmission and civilizational guidance. It is also, and with equal honesty, a history of conflict, of power struggles, and of the sometimes devastating consequences of the involvement of advanced extraterrestrial civilizations in the affairs of a younger and more vulnerable world. The period known in Syrian tradition as the Pyramid Wars or the Centaurian conflicts represents one of the most intense and consequential of these episodes, a period of interstellar and interdimensional warfare that played out partly in the cosmic arena of competing civilizations and partly on the surface and in the energetic fields of Earth itself. The roots of the Pyramid Wars lie in the complex politics of the Syrian and broader galactic civilization during a period when multiple powerful factions were competing for influence, resources, and territorial control across a vast region of the galaxy. The Anoch Empire, for all its achievements and its genuine commitment to the principles of the Emerald Order, had by this period become entangled in a web of political alliances, rivalries, and strategic calculations that pulled it in many directions simultaneously. Some factions within the Anoch leadership were committed to a vision of Earth as a protected zone of civilizational development, a world whose human inhabitants should be supported and guided, but ultimately left free to develop their own potential. Other factions saw Earth primarily as a strategic and resource-rich possession, one that justified whatever degree of control and manipulation was necessary to ensure that its benefits were preserved for those who claimed sovereignty over it. These internal Anoch divisions were complicated by the involvement of other galactic powers, particularly the Orion Alliance, which was itself a complex entity representing a coalition of civilizations centered in the Orion region of the galaxy and including significant draconian and reptilian elements. The Orion Alliance had its own interests in Earth and its own view of the proper relationship between advanced civilizations and younger worlds. Its perspective, in its most extreme form, was one that saw younger civilizations primarily as potential resources for extraction and exploitation, rather than as beings with inherent rights and potential. This perspective was fundamentally incompatible with the highest principles of the Emerald Order, and the conflict between these two worldviews, between the Orion Alliance's resource extraction orientation and the Emerald Order's wisdom transmission orientation, was one of the deepest drivers of the Pyramid Wars. The conflict that erupted into overt warfare involved many parties and played out across multiple levels of reality simultaneously. In the physical dimension, it involved military engagements between fleets of starships, battles for control of strategic installations on and around Earth, and the use of advanced weapons technologies that caused physical damage of enormous scale. In the higher dimensions, it involved battles for control of planetary stargates and dimensional access points, attempts to manipulate the energetic fields of Earth in ways that would give one faction or another a strategic advantage, and the deployment of technologies designed to interfere with the multidimensional consciousness, interfacing capabilities of human beings, rendering them more malleable and easier to control. The Giza complex, as the most significant interdimensional installation on Earth's surface, was naturally one of the primary focal points of this conflict. Control of Giza meant, in the Syrian strategic calculus, access to the most powerful dimensional interface on the planet, the ability to modulate the energetic environment of a vast region of Earth's energy field, and control of the primary communication channel between Earth and the Syrian Anunnaki civilization. The battles for control of Giza were therefore among the most intense of the Pyramid Wars period, involving not only physical military engagements, but sophisticated operations in the fourth dimensional field, attempts to penetrate and manipulate the etheric structures of the Giza complex, and the deployment of what might be called consciousness warfare technologies designed to undermine the awareness and functioning of those defending the installation. The beings known in the Sumerian tradition as the Igigi, the Divine Watchers, played a particularly complex role in the Pyramid Wars period, originally established by the Anunnaki leadership as an observer and administrative class. The Igigi occupied a middle position in the Anunnaki hierarchy, below the full Anunnaki nobility, but above ordinary human beings in status and capability. Over time, however, resentments accumulated within the Igigi class about what they perceived as their unfair treatment by the Anunnaki elite, and a significant faction of the Igigi eventually broke away from the official Anunnaki structure and aligned themselves with forces that were pursuing agendas fundamentally incompatible with human well-being. These breakaway Igigi, identified in the Book of Enoch tradition as the fallen angels or watchers who descended to Earth and entered into inappropriate relationships with human women, are understood in the Syrian tradition as beings who had severed their connection to the higher principles of the Emerald Order and who were consequently operating from a place of ego-driven self-interest rather than genuine wisdom and service. Their interaction with human women was not a simple romantic or physical impulse, but was part of a deliberate strategy of genetic and consciousness manipulation, an attempt to create a hybrid human Igigi lineage that would serve the interests of those who had rejected the legitimate Anunnaki authority and were pursuing independent agendas on Earth. The Nephilim, the giant hybrid offspring described in the tradition, were the result of this program. Beings who combined human physical adaptability with Igigi, energetic and consciousness capabilities in ways that their creators hoped would give them a decisive advantage in the struggle for control of Earth. The involvement of the draconian forces in the Pyramid Wars period added another layer of complexity and another source of destructive energy to what was already a highly complex situation. The Draconians, as one of the oldest reptilian civilizations in this galaxy, brought to the conflict a combination of extraordinary military capability, sophisticated psychological manipulation, and a fundamentally different philosophical orientation from that of the humanoid Syrian traditions. The Draconian view of power, which prioritized hierarchy, dominance, and the subordination of weaker beings to stronger ones as the natural and appropriate order of the universe, was the philosophical antithesis of the Emerald Order's vision of cooperation, mutual respect, and the progressive liberation of all consciousness. The alliance between certain Anunnaki factions and the draconian forces during the Pyramid Wars period represented one of the most consequential of the distortions that befell the Syrian tradition during this troubled era. The resolution of the Pyramid Wars period, which came not through decisive military victory by any single faction, but through a gradual exhaustion of the combatants and a series of difficult negotiated settlements, left the situation on Earth profoundly changed. The most dramatic and physically visible change was the decline and eventual disappearance of the direct Anunnaki presence on Earth's surface. The settlements negotiated at the end of the Pyramid Wars included agreements that significantly reduced the scope of direct Anunnaki involvement in human affairs, partly as a concession to various parties who wanted to limit Anunnaki power, and partly as a strategic calculation by the Anunnaki leadership themselves, who recognized that the era of direct physical governance of Earth was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain in the face of growing human numbers and capabilities. This withdrawal of the direct Anunnaki presence did not mean the end of Syrian involvement with Earth, however. It meant rather a shift in the mode of involvement from direct physical presence and governance to the more subtle and indirect forms of influence and support that have characterized the relationship in the period since the end of the Pyramid Wars. The Syrian intelligences, who maintained their commitment to the well-being of humanity and to the fulfillment of the original vision of the human project, did not abandon their responsibilities with the physical withdrawal of the Anunnaki. They simply shifted their mode of operation, working through the channels of inspiration, energetic support, and the transmission of coded wisdom through symbolic and artistic forms that could be received and interpreted by human beings who had developed the appropriate sensitivity and discernment. The Dogon and the African connection to Sirius. Among the many human cultures on Earth that have preserved detailed knowledge of the Sirius system and its civilizational significance, the Dogon people of Mali in West Africa represent perhaps the most remarkable and most widely discussed example. The Dogon possess an astronomical tradition of extraordinary precision that includes detailed knowledge of the Sirius system, including the existence of Sirius B as a small, dense, invisible companion star, the orbital period of Sirius B around Sirius A, and additional claims about the Sirius system that conventional science has not yet fully confirmed or denied. This knowledge was documented in detail by the French anthropologists Marcel Griol and Germain Dieterlen following their fieldwork with the Dogon in the 1930s and 1940s, and their publications of this knowledge created a sensation that has not entirely subsided to this day. The puzzle from the perspective of conventional scholarship is how the Dogon could possess such precise astronomical knowledge about a star system whose details require modern telescopic and spectrographic equipment to detect and measure. Sirius B was not detected by European astronomers until 1862, and its status as an extraordinarily dense white dwarf was not understood until early in the 20th century. Yet the Dogon tradition included accurate descriptions of Sirius B that align with what modern astronomy has since confirmed, including its extraordinary density, its orbital dynamics, and its significance within the Sirius system. Conventional explanations have ranged from coincidence to contamination from modern sources, but none of these explanations fully accounts for the consistency and depth of the Dogon astronomical tradition, or for its integration into a broader cosmological and mythological framework that shows every sign of great age. The Syrian tradition offers a straightforward explanation, though one that conventional scholarship cannot easily accommodate. The Dogon astronomical knowledge is understood as a preserved transmission from the Syrian civilization itself, carried to West Africa during a period of direct contact between the Dogon ancestors and Syrian beings, and faithfully maintained through a specialized initiatory tradition across many generations. The Dogon themselves attribute their astronomical knowledge to beings who came from the Sirius system, calling these beings the Nommo, a name that bears an unmistakable resemblance to the Nommos, the aquatic Syrian beings described earlier in this work. The Nommo of Dogon tradition are indeed described as aquatic beings, amphibious in nature, who descended from the sky in an ark that landed in a body of water, and who taught the Dogon ancestors the essential principles of their cosmological, agricultural, and social system. The content of what the Nommo taught the Dogon goes far beyond astronomy. The Dogon cosmological system is extraordinarily sophisticated, encompassing detailed accounts of cosmic creation, dimensional structure, the nature of matter and consciousness, and the relationships among various classes of beings in the universal hierarchy. Many aspects of this cosmological system find close parallels in the broader Syrian philosophical tradition, including the emphasis on water as the primary medium of consciousness and creation, the recognition of multiple interpenetrating dimensional levels of reality, and the understanding of the creative process as a fundamentally vibrational phenomenon in which the universe is continuously generated through a cosmic sound or word. The depth and coherence of this system suggest that it represents a genuine transmission of Syrian wisdom, simplified and adapted for communication to a culture operating at a different level of technical development, but preserved with remarkable fidelity to the original through the mechanism of specialized initiation. The choice of West Africa as the site of this transmission is itself significant and reflects the broader pattern of Syrian genetic and cultural influence in Africa that the tradition identifies as one of the primary vectors through which Syrian heritage was preserved and transmitted on Earth. Many traditions within the Syrian historical framework identify sub-Saharan Africa as one of the regions of Earth that has the most direct and ancient connection to the Syrian civilization, both genetically through the presence of Syrian genetic contributions in the human populations of this region, and culturally through the preservation of fragments of Syrian knowledge in various African spiritual and astronomical traditions. The remarkable astronomical knowledge of various African peoples, including the Dogon, but also many others, is in this framework understood not as a puzzling anomaly, but as a natural consequence of the genuine astronomical tradition that was transmitted to the ancestors of these peoples during periods of direct Syrian contact. The Vedic tradition and the Syrian cosmic science. The ancient Vedic tradition of India represents another extraordinarily rich reservoir of Syrian-influenced knowledge, preserved through a tradition of oral transmission of remarkable fidelity that maintained these texts virtually unchanged across many thousands of years. The Vedas, together with their associated literature including the Upanishads, the Puranas, the Mahabharata, and the Bhagavata Purana, constitute what is arguably the largest single body of cosmological, philosophical, and spiritual knowledge preserved from the ancient world, and much of this knowledge shows striking correspondences with the Syrian tradition as described in this work. The Vedic understanding of cosmic time, expressed in the system of yugas or cosmic ages, offers one of the most striking correspondences. The Vedic Yuga system describes reality as oscillating through vast cycles of cosmic time, moving from a golden age of maximum consciousness and wisdom through progressively darkening ages of diminishing awareness and increasing materialism, before eventually beginning the return journey toward a new golden age. This cyclical view of cosmic history corresponds closely with the Syrian understanding of dimensional cycles in the galaxy, cycles through which the collective consciousness of a given region of the galaxy moves through phases of greater and lesser access to higher dimensional wisdom, depending on the alignment of that region with the great central sources of cosmic energy and information. The beings described in the Vedic literature as the Devas and Asuras, the celestial beings and their opponents, correspond in many important respects to the humanoid and reptilian draconian factions, whose conflicts have shaped the history of the Syrian civilization's interaction with Earth. The great wars of the Vedic epics, particularly the war between the Devas and Asuras, described in many Puranic texts, and the great conflict narrated in the Mahabharata, are understood in the Syrian historical framework as literary and mythological encodings of actual historical events involving Syrian, Anunnaki, Draconian, and other extraterrestrial parties whose conflicts played out partly on Earth and partly in the wider cosmic arena. The Vedic description of the Vimanas, the flying craft of the ancient gods, corresponds closely with the description of Syrian starships. The precision with which some Vedic texts describe the construction, operation, and capabilities of these craft has been one of the primary pieces of evidence cited by those who argue for the historical reality of advanced technology in the ancient world. The Vaimanika Shastra, a text that purports to describe the technical details of Vimana construction and operation, contains descriptions of propulsion systems, navigation instruments, and materials that have no obvious correspondence with anything available in the historical period when the text was supposedly written down, but that find many parallels with the descriptions of Syrian aerospace technology preserved in other traditions. The Vedic tradition also preserves remarkably detailed accounts of what appear to be nuclear or energy weapons used in ancient conflicts, descriptions of weapons that could destroy entire cities, create mushroom clouds, and produce radiation sickness symptoms in survivors that match modern accounts of the effects of nuclear weapons with disturbing precision. Whether these descriptions refer to actual physical nuclear weapons, to energy-based weapons of Syrian or Draconian origin, or to metaphorical descriptions of consciousness-level conflicts playing out in the higher dimensions, is a matter of interpretation. But their presence in texts of great antiquity suggests that the ancient authors were drawing on memories, whether their own or transmitted to them through initiatory traditions, of events of extraordinary power and destructiveness that involved technologies far beyond what conventional history attributes to the ancient world. The Pleiadian connection and the galactic family tree. To fully understand the Syrian civilization and its place in the broader story of galactic consciousness, it is essential to understand its relationship to the Pleiadian civilization, which stands alongside the Syrian as one of the primary civilizational influences on Earth and human development. The Pleiadians and the Sirians share a common ultimate origin in the Lyron heritage, and their civilizations have been intertwined through countless generations of interaction, alliance, conflict, hybridization, and mutual influence. Understanding the relationship between these two great galactic civilizations and understanding where they differ as well as where they agree is essential for a full picture of the forces that have shaped Earth's history. The Pleiadian civilization originated when groups of Lyron refugees, fleeing the devastation of the Lyron Wars, eventually made their way to the star cluster known as the Pleiades in the Taurus constellation. The Pleiades, a cluster of hundreds of stars at a distance of approximately 440 light-years from Earth, offered a rich and diverse environment for the development of new civilizations, with multiple inhabitable worlds at varying distances from their parent stars, providing a range of environmental conditions that supported diverse forms of biological and cultural evolution. The Lyron refugees who became the first Pleiadians brought with them the essential wisdom of the Lyron heritage, including the core teachings of the Emerald Order, and proceeded to develop these teachings in new and distinctive ways as they adapted to their new home and encountered new circumstances. The Pleiadian civilization that emerged from this long process is in many ways a sister civilization to the Sirian, sharing the same foundational heritage, but expressing it through a different set of evolutionary experiences and emphases. Where the Sirian tradition developed a particularly strong orientation toward genetic science, dimensional technology, and the engineering of biological and energetic systems, the Pleiadian tradition developed a particularly strong orientation toward consciousness cultivation, emotional intelligence, and the arts of what might be called spiritual diplomacy. The capacity to navigate the complex relationships between beings of very different natures and histories with wisdom, empathy, and creative problem-solving. These differences in emphasis reflect the different environmental and historical circumstances in which the two civilizations developed. The Sirians, under the intense radiation of the Sirius system, and in the complex political environment created by the Anoch Empire's embrace of enormous diversity, were pushed by necessity toward the development of robust technical and organizational capabilities. The Pleiadians, developing in the more benign and harmonious energetic environment of the Pleiades, were able to pursue a more sustained and intensive focus on the subtler dimensions of consciousness development. Neither approach is superior to the other, they are complementary, and the combination of Sirian technical mastery with Pleiadian consciousness wisdom has been, at its best, one of the most powerful forces for positive civilizational development in this galaxy. The Pleiadian involvement with Earth began, like the Sirian, in the very ancient past, predating the development of the human species by many millions of years. The first Pleiadian explorers who arrived in the solar system found a world that was beautiful and biologically rich, but that had not yet developed the kind of consciousness complexity that would make it interesting as a site for civilizational seeding. They cataloged it, studied it, and maintained a watching presence over the millennia as Earth's biosphere developed its extraordinary complexity and diversity. When the Sirian civilization began its more intensive engagement with Earth, including the genetic engineering of humanity, the Pleiadians were already present as observers and advisors, offering their perspective on the project from their particular vantage point of consciousness-centered wisdom. The relationship between the Pleiadian and Sirian influences on the human genome is one of the most complex and debated aspects of the genetic history of humanity. Both civilizations contributed genetic material to the human blueprint, along with contributions from several other galactic civilizations, but they contributed different aspects reflecting their different areas of mastery. The Sirian contribution is understood to have been particularly significant in the areas of physical structure, neurological architecture, and the DNA-level coding that enables multidimensional consciousness interfacing. The Pleiadian contribution is understood to have been particularly significant in the areas of emotional intelligence, intuitive awareness, and the capacity for the kind of empathic resonance that is the biological basis of spiritual experience. The tension between these two aspects of the human inheritance is something that any reflective human being can recognize in themselves and in the broader patterns of human history. The human being is simultaneously a remarkably powerful agent of physical manipulation and engineering, capable of building civilizations, developing technologies, and reshaping physical environments in extraordinary ways, and a being of deep emotional sensitivity and spiritual longing, capable of profound love, transcendent beauty, and the recognition of values that transcend any particular self-interest. These two capacities are both genuine human gifts, and the challenge of integrating them, of bringing the power of human technical and organizational capability into alignment with the depth of human emotional and spiritual wisdom, is one of the central challenges of human evolution. The Orion legacy and the galactic conflicts. The Orion constellation represents, in the Syrian cosmological tradition, one of the most complex and conflicted regions of galactic history. The drama of Orion is, in many ways, the central drama of the galaxy in this sector of space, and in the current cosmic era, a drama involving the struggle between those civilizations that have aligned themselves with the principles of the Emerald Order, of mutual respect, consciousness development, and the service of the greater evolutionary good, and those that have aligned themselves with what the tradition calls the Luciferian or negative alien agenda, a set of principles centered on self-service, the exploitation of others, and the accumulation of power without regard for the well-being of those affected. The Orion region of the galaxy was colonized in the ancient past by many different civilizational streams, some tracing their origins to the Lyron heritage, and others developing independently in the Orion region itself. Among the indigenous civilizations of the Orion region were several reptilian and insectoid races, whose evolutionary histories had produced beings of great intelligence and capability, but whose philosophical frameworks were, in many cases, fundamentally different from those of the humanoid Lyron-descended civilizations. The reptilian civilizations of Orion, in particular, developed highly organized social structures based on principles of strict hierarchy, the dominance of the strong over the weak, and the absolute priority of group survival over individual well-being. These principles, while comprehensible as evolutionary adaptations that had served these civilizations well in certain contexts, were fundamentally incompatible with the Emerald Order's vision of a universe organized around the progressive liberation and self-determination of all conscious beings. The conflict between the humanoid and reptilian approaches to cosmic organization, which the Syrian tradition identifies as one of the fundamental recurring themes of galactic history, reached one of its most intense expressions in the Orion region, in what the tradition calls the Orion Wars. These wars, which involved many different civilizations on many different sides and played out over an enormous span of time, left the Orion region with a complex legacy of both extraordinary wisdom and profound trauma. Many of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy trace their philosophical and spiritual development partly to the crucible of the Orion Wars, where the consequences of different approaches to consciousness and power were demonstrated with devastating clarity, and the traditions that emerged from this experience, including the particular emphasis on discernment and the recognition of service to others versus service to self as the fundamental moral axis of cosmic existence, have been enormously influential in shaping the broader galactic civilization of which the Syrian tradition is a part. The Orion alliance that emerged from the Orion Wars was not a simple or monolithic entity. It included beings of many different origins and philosophical orientations, united by their common experience of the wars and by various agreements about mutual defense and cooperation, but divided by deep differences in values and ultimate goals. Some members of the Orion Alliance were genuinely committed to the well-being of all beings and maintained their participation in the alliance primarily as a means of preventing a return to the destructive conflicts of the wars. Others were primarily motivated by self-interest and used the structure of the alliance as a vehicle for the pursuit of power and territorial expansion. And still others occupied complex middle positions, torn between the conflicting pressures of their commitments, their histories, and their genuine but imperfectly developed wisdom. The Orion Alliance's relationship to Earth and to the Syrian civilization is therefore not simple. In some historical periods and through some of its representatives, the Orion Alliance has been a genuine partner in the project of supporting Earth's civilizational development, contributing wisdom and technology that have enriched human culture. In other periods and through other representatives, it has been a source of interference and manipulation, pursuing agendas that served the interests of particular factions within the alliance at the expense of human well-being and self-determination. Understanding this complexity is essential for a nuanced reading of the many accounts of interaction between human civilization and Orion-associated beings, whether those accounts come from ancient mythological sources, from recent experiential testimony, or from the various channeled and transmitted materials that have circulated in the spiritual and alternative research communities of the current era. The Andromedan perspective and the Galactic Council. Beyond the civilizations of the Sirius system, the Pleiades, and the Orion region, the broader galactic community includes many other civilizations of varying degrees of advancement and influence. Among these, the civilization of Andromeda occupies a particularly significant position, both because of its extraordinary age and advancement, and because of its specific role in the governance and mediation of galactic affairs in this sector of space. The Andromedan civilization, which in the Syrian tradition is understood as among the oldest and most advanced in the local group of galaxies, has served for an immensely long period as a kind of elder wisdom tradition within the galactic community, providing guidance, mediation, and the perspective of accumulated experience to younger civilizations navigating the inevitable challenges of civilizational development. The Andromedan Council, which is understood as the principal governing body of the Andromedan civilization and one of the most influential bodies in the broader structure of galactic governance, has maintained a particular interest in Earth and the human experiment throughout the period of active Syrian and other civilizational involvement with this world. The Andromedans have generally approached the situation on Earth from a perspective that prioritizes non-interference with the autonomous development of younger civilizations, while also maintaining a responsibility to prevent the most extreme forms of manipulation and exploitation that could permanently distort or destroy the developmental trajectory of a younger world. This perspective has sometimes put the Andromedan Council in a mediating or intervening role in the conflicts between other galactic civilizations over Earth, acting as a kind of referee or constitutional court within the framework of galactic governance. The relationship between the Andromedan Council and the Syrian civilization has been generally positive, rooted in a shared commitment to the essential principles of the Emerald Order and in a mutual recognition of the long-term importance of the human experiment on Earth. The Andromedans have been particularly supportive of those aspects of the Syrian tradition that emphasize consciousness development, multidimensional integration, and the service of the greater evolutionary good, while being more cautious about those aspects of Syrian history that have involved genetic engineering, territorial claims, and the use of advanced technology for purposes of control. This nuanced relationship has provided an important check on some of the more problematic tendencies within the Syrian civilization, while also supporting and amplifying its most positive contributions. The broader structure of galactic governance within which the Andromedan Council operates is a complex and multi-layered system that has evolved over billions of years of galactic civilizational development. At the highest levels, it is understood as expressing the will and the wisdom of the creative intelligence that underlies all existence, mediated through beings whose consciousness has expanded sufficiently to receive and transmit that wisdom with reasonable accuracy. At intermediate levels, it operates through councils, federations, and other collective decision-making bodies that bring together representatives of many different civilizations in the collaborative pursuit of galactic well-being. At the most local levels, it operates through the specific agreements, protocols, and relationships that have been negotiated among the civilizations, with direct stakes in particular regions or situations. Earth's situation within this galactic governance structure is one of particular complexity and sensitivity. As a world that has been subject to extensive involvement by multiple advanced civilizations, Earth has generated a complex web of claims, agreements, and competing interests among the galactic community. The resolution of these competing claims and the creation of conditions in which humanity can genuinely exercise its own self-determination, rather than remaining as a managed resource or contested prize in the games of the galactic powers, is understood in the Syrian tradition as one of the central tasks of the current cosmic era. It is a task that requires the cooperation of many different parties and the gradual evolution of both human consciousness and galactic governance structures in the direction of greater wisdom, greater inclusivity, and greater genuine respect for the rights and potential of all beings. The quantum technologies of the Syrian civilization. Having established the historical and philosophical context of the Syrian civilization, it is valuable to examine in more detail the specific technological achievements that have made the Syrians one of the most technically capable civilizations in this region of the galaxy. While the Syrian technological tradition is vast and encompasses many different domains of knowledge and capability, some of the most significant and distinctive technologies can be grouped under the broad heading of quantum technologies, a term that encompasses those capabilities which operate at the level where the distinction between energy and information, between matter and consciousness, begins to dissolve. The foundation of Syrian quantum technology is the understanding, already briefly described in connection with the Nomos tradition, that sound is the primary creative force of the universe, the vibrational medium through which consciousness expresses itself and through which matter is organized into form. This is not a metaphorical statement, but a precise technical description of how the universe actually works at its most fundamental level. The contemporary physics of Earth has begun to approach this understanding from one direction through the investigation of quantum fields, wave functions, and the role of observer effects in quantum phenomena, but it has not yet synthesized these approaches into the kind of unified understanding of consciousness, vibration, and matter that the Syrian tradition has worked with for millions of years. Syrian quantum sound technology operates through the generation and precise modulation of what the tradition calls living sound, sound that carries the information patterns of consciousness in a way that ordinary mechanically generated sound does not. Living sound is generated not by mechanical oscillators, but by consciousness itself, operating through various biological and technological interfaces that translate the vibrational patterns of conscious intention into physical sound waves with precisely specified frequency, amplitude, phase, and harmonic characteristics. When living sound of the appropriate specifications is directed at a physical system, it interacts not merely with the physical matter of that system, but with the entire multidimensional information structure of which the physical matter is the most dense expression. This interaction can produce effects that would appear miraculous from the perspective of purely physical dimensional understanding, including healing at the informational root of disease rather than at the level of physical symptoms, the restructuring of molecular and even atomic arrangements, the opening and closing of dimensional access points, and the generation of field effects that influence the consciousness of beings within their range. The most advanced applications of Syrian quantum sound technology move beyond the manipulation of existing matter and energy into what might be called creative sound work, the generation of new forms of matter and energy through the precise application of consciousness-directed sonic templates. This capability is understood as a working with the same creative force through which the universe itself generates new forms of being, the primordial sound or word that many spiritual traditions have identified as the origin of creation. By aligning their conscious intention with this primordial creative force and expressing it through the medium of living sound, the most advanced Syrian practitioners of this technology are understood to have been capable of feats of creation that conventional understanding would classify as miraculous. The crystal technologies of the Syrian civilization represent a distinct but closely related domain of quantum capability. Crystals, in the Syrian understanding, are not simply attractive minerals, but are extraordinarily precise natural structures that embody the mathematical principles of universal order in their molecular organization. The regular, repeating patterns of a crystal lattice create a kind of living mathematical template that resonates naturally with the mathematical structures of consciousness at various dimensional levels. This natural resonance makes crystals uniquely capable of receiving, storing, and transmitting information and energy in ways that other materials cannot approach. The Syrian civilization developed the use of crystals to levels of sophistication that are difficult to convey in terms comprehensible from the perspective of contemporary Earth technology. Natural crystals were first studied and classified according to their specific resonant properties, with different crystal types identified as specialized interfaces with particular dimensional levels or particular aspects of the universal information field. Over time, methods were developed for growing crystals with precisely specified properties, tailoring their molecular structure to optimize their performance for specific technological applications. Eventually, the Syrian crystal engineers developed the ability to create entirely synthetic crystal structures, including types with no natural counterpart, optimized for the particular demands of specific high-performance applications. The most significant of the crystal technologies were those used as the power cores and computational systems of Syrian aerospace vehicles and other advanced technological installations. The crystal plasma energy cores that powered the great Syrian starships, already mentioned in the context of the pyramid-shaped vessels, represented the highest development of this technology, creating systems capable of generating, storing, and releasing enormous quantities of energy in precisely controlled ways, while simultaneously serving as the primary navigational and consciousness interfacing systems of the vessels. The crystal core of a Syrian starship was not simply a power plant. It was a kind of living technological consciousness, a crystal-based system sufficiently complex to process information at rates and with forms of parallelism that approach the capabilities of biological neural networks, and sufficiently precisely tuned to the consciousness frequencies of its operators to serve as a genuine extension of their awareness and intention. The Stargate technology that the Syrian civilization developed and utilized for interdimensional and interstellar travel represents perhaps the most sophisticated expression of the entire Syrian technological tradition. Stargates, in the Syrian understanding, are not artificial constructions, but are features of the natural dimensional architecture of the universe, points where the fabric of space-time and the boundaries between dimensional levels are particularly thin and permeable. The Syrian technological contribution was not the creation of stargates from scratch, but the development of sophisticated methods for detecting, accessing, stabilizing, and navigating the natural stargate network that is embedded in the structure of the galaxy. Natural stargates come in many different types and sizes, with varying degrees of stability, varying distances of connection, and varying selectivity with respect to the dimensional levels they access. Some connect specific points in three-dimensional space across enormous distances, enabling what from a physical perspective appears to be instantaneous travel between distant locations. Others provide access to higher or lower dimensional levels, enabling the transition of consciousness or matter from one dimensional state to another. Still others function as temporal access points, providing connections not only across space but across time, though the use of temporal access points carries particular risks and ethical responsibilities and is consequently subject to the strictest protocols in Syrian technological tradition. The detection of natural stargates requires sensitive instruments capable of measuring subtle variations in the local dimensional field, variations that indicate the presence of a dimensional thin spot where stargate access is possible. The Syrian civilization developed many such instruments over its long technological history, ranging from relatively simple crystal resonance detectors used in early exploration to extraordinarily sophisticated multidimensional field analyzers capable of mapping the complete dimensional topology of a region of space with great precision. The installation and operation of these detection systems formed a major part of the Syrian scientific infrastructure and produced the detailed maps of the natural stargate network that made efficient interdimensional travel possible. Accessing a natural stargate, once detected, required the generation of what the Syrian tradition calls an activation key, a precisely specified pattern of energy and information that resonates with the particular dimensional structure of the stargate in question and activates its transitional function. Different stargates require different activation keys, and the knowledge of the correct key for each significant stargate in the network is one of the most carefully guarded categories of information in the Syrian technological tradition. The activation key must be generated by systems capable of extraordinary precision, as even small deviations from the correct pattern can result in failed transitions, energetic instabilities, or, in the worst cases, catastrophic dimensional disruptions that can affect large regions of the surrounding space. The development and maintenance of the technologies capable of generating these activation keys with the required precision is accordingly one of the most demanding branches of Syrian engineering. The navigation of a stargate transit requires still further technological and consciousness capabilities. Once the Stargate activation has begun, the transiting being or vessel enters a transitional state in which it is neither fully in the originating dimensional location nor yet in the destination. This transitional state, which the Syrian tradition describes as the between, is not simply an empty passage, but a dimensional environment with its own characteristics, including the presence of various forms of energy and intelligence that have their primary existence in the dimensional borderlands. Navigation through the between requires both technical instruments capable of maintaining orientation in a dimensionally complex environment and the consciousness capabilities to remain stable and intentional in conditions that can be profoundly disorienting to unprepared minds. The Syrian tradition describes extensive protocols for the training of Stargate operators, protocols that combine technical education with intensive consciousness development work. The ideal Stargate operator is not merely a technical specialist, but a fully realized being, one who has developed sufficient stability and clarity of consciousness to maintain their orientation and intentionality under the most challenging conditions. This requirement for genuine consciousness development as a prerequisite for the use of the most advanced technologies is characteristic of the Syrian tradition as a whole, which has consistently maintained the position that advanced technology without advanced consciousness is not simply a neutral tool, but an active danger, as likely to amplify destructive capacities as constructive ones. The genetic science of the Syrian masters. The genetic sciences of the Syrian civilization, already introduced in the context of the engineering of humanity, represent one of the most consequential and most complex chapters in the entire Syrian technological tradition. To understand them fully requires going beyond the surface account of what the Syrian geneticists did and examining more deeply how they understood what they were doing, what principles guided their work, and what they understood about the relationship between genetic structure and the full spectrum of consciousness that is the ultimate subject of all Syrian science. The Syrian understanding of genetics begins, as we have noted, with the recognition that DNA is a multidimensional information structure rather than simply a physical chemical encoding. This understanding has been developed with extraordinary precision over millions of years of research, producing a complete map of the relationship between specific genetic sequences and specific consciousness qualities, between particular DNA configurations and the multidimensional energetic and informational fields with which they interface. This map is far more detailed and far more inclusive than anything that contemporary Earth genetics has begun to approach, encompassing not only the protein coding sequences that Earth genetics focuses on, but the vast regions of DNA that Earth science has sometimes dismissed as junk DNA, but that the Syrian tradition recognizes as the primary sites of multidimensional consciousness interfacing. These non-coding regions of the genome, which in human DNA constitute the vast majority of the total genetic sequence, are understood in the Syrian framework as the primary communication interface between the physical biological organism and the higher dimensional fields in which it is embedded. They function as a kind of cosmic radio receiver, continuously sampling the information content of the dimensional fields that surround and interpenetrate the physical organism, and translating that information into biological signals that influence the expression of the protein coding genes. This means that the actual behavior of any biological organism is not simply determined by its genetic sequence in the mechanistic way that a simple reading of the central dogma of molecular biology might suggest, but is continuously influenced by the higher dimensional information environment in which the organism exists. This understanding has profound implications for how the Syrian geneticists approached their work. It meant that genetic engineering could not be conducted effectively if confined only to the physical-chemical dimension of DNA. To achieve the results they sought, the Syrian geneticists had to work simultaneously at the physical level of DNA sequence and at the higher dimensional levels of the energetic and informational fields that interacted with that DNA. This required a combination of physical dimensional laboratory techniques, which had developed to extraordinary levels of precision over millions of years, and consciousness-based techniques through which the higher dimensional fields could be accessed, read, and modified. The most accomplished Syrian geneticists were therefore beings of both extraordinary technical skill and extraordinary consciousness development, able to hold in awareness simultaneously the physical-chemical dimension of their work and the higher dimensional energetic and informational dimensions, and to coordinate interventions across all of these levels in ways that produced the coherent, integrated results they sought. Training to this level of combined technical and consciousness mastery required many decades of intensive study and practice, and the number of individuals capable of this highest level of the genetic art was always relatively small, even within the Syrian civilization. These masters of genetic science were among the most respected beings in the entire Syrian culture, recognized not only for their extraordinary technical capabilities, but for the depth of wisdom and the clarity of consciousness that those capabilities required. The processes through which the Syrian geneticists actually carried out their work combined physical laboratory techniques with consciousness-based operations in complex sequences that varied depending on the specific objectives of any given project. Physical interventions included the manipulation of DNA sequences using advanced nanoscale technologies capable of operating with single-molecule precision, the synthesis of new genetic sequences encoding specific consciousness interfacing functions, and the delivery of new or modified genetic material into target organisms through various physical and energetic vectors. Consciousness-based interventions included the direct modulation of the higher dimensional fields interfacing with the target DNA, the transmission of consciousness templates or archetypes that would guide the developmental expression of newly introduced genetic material, and the monitoring of the higher dimensional effects of physical genetic changes to ensure that the intended consciousness qualities were being expressed as designed. The work of engineering the human genome was, by any measure, one of the largest and most complex genetic projects ever undertaken in this region of the galaxy. The project extended over an extraordinarily long period, with the initial phases beginning millions of years in the past, when Earth's pre-human hominid population was first identified as a promising substrate for civilizational development, and subsequent phases of modification and refinement, continuing through many cycles of Syrian engagement with Earth. The accumulated complexity of human DNA, with its vast stretches of non-coding regions encoding layers upon layers of multidimensional consciousness interfacing capability, and its many signatures of contribution from multiple galactic civilizations, reflects this long and complex history of progressive development. One of the most significant and most debated aspects of the human genetic heritage is the presence of what might be called consciousness-limiting sequences, regions of the genome that appear to function not to enhance multidimensional awareness, but to constrain it. These sequences, which the Syrian tradition attributes to deliberate interventions by those whose agenda was to create a more manageable and less independently aware human being, are understood as one of the primary reasons why the extraordinary multidimensional consciousness interfacing capabilities encoded in the human genome have remained largely dormant through much of human history. The existence of these limiting sequences is consistent with the evidence of many human spiritual traditions, which describe the human being as carrying a divine potential that has been systematically suppressed by forces opposed to its full expression. The removal or circumvention of these limiting sequences is understood in the Syrian tradition as one of the key steps in the activation of full human consciousness potential, and it is a process that is understood to be underway in the current era, driven by cosmic energetic conditions that are naturally dissolving many of these limitations as the Earth system moves through a period of accelerating dimensional shift. This natural activation process, which operates through the influence of higher dimensional energies on the non-coding regions of human DNA, is understood as one of the primary mechanisms through which humanity is currently undergoing the accelerated evolution of consciousness that many traditions from many cultures have predicted for this period of time. The soul and its journey through the Syrian universe. Beyond the domains of physical science, genetic engineering, and interdimensional technology, the Syrian tradition has developed a profound and detailed understanding of what might be called the soul science, the study of consciousness in its aspect as an individualized stream of awareness that persists through multiple physical lifetimes and multiple dimensional experiences in the course of its evolutionary journey. This soul science is not a speculative philosophical system, but is understood as an empirical discipline, grounded in the direct observations of consciousness explorers who have developed the ability to perceive the multidimensional reality of consciousness with precision and to report on its structure, dynamics, and developmental patterns. The Syrian understanding of the soul begins with the recognition that individual consciousness is not simply a product of biological neural activity, but is a real and primary aspect of existence that precedes any particular biological form and continues beyond it. The soul, in this understanding, is a specific pattern of individualized consciousness, a unique vibrational signature that expresses a particular perspective on and experience of the infinite creativity of the universe. Each soul is understood as genuinely unique, not merely numerically distinct from other souls, but qualitatively unique in its particular configuration of qualities, capacities, and experiential history. This uniqueness is not an accident or an arbitrary circumstance, but is understood as essential to the purposes of existence itself, as the universe's way of exploring its own infinite potential through the richness of distinct individual perspectives. The journey of a soul through the Syrian universe, as described in the tradition, is an extraordinary odyssey spanning enormous spans of time and visiting many different dimensional levels and many different physical worlds and civilizations. Souls are understood to begin their individualized existence at relatively simple levels of awareness, gradually accumulating experience and developing wisdom through a series of physical lifetimes in biological bodies of increasing complexity. As the soul matures, it develops the ability to maintain continuity of awareness between physical lifetimes, eventually reaching a level of development at which the physical lifetime is experienced not as the totality of existence, but as one episode in a much larger continuous story that the soul remembers with increasing clarity. The Syrian tradition describes specific stages of soul development, each characterized by a particular quality of awareness and a particular relationship to physical reality and to the higher dimensions. In the earliest stages, the soul is fully immersed in physical experience, identifying completely with its current physical body and having little or no access to memories of previous lifetimes or to awareness of higher dimensional reality. This stage, which corresponds roughly to the situation of most contemporary human beings, is not understood as a failure or a deficiency, but as a natural and necessary phase of experience in which the soul develops the grounding in physical reality that will serve as the foundation for later dimensional expansion. As the soul progresses through successive physical lifetimes, it gradually develops greater subtlety of awareness, greater emotional intelligence, and the beginnings of intuitive access to higher dimensional information. Spiritual practices, artistic sensitivity, and deep relational engagement all serve as accelerants of this development, helping the soul to break through the constraints of purely physical awareness and begin to perceive the wider reality of which physical existence is only a part. Eventually, the soul reaches a level of development at which it can maintain conscious awareness across the boundary between the physical and fourth dimensional levels, experiencing the continuity of its existence across physical lifetimes with increasing clarity and being able to access fourth dimensional resources of healing, wisdom, and creative inspiration in its physical life. Further stages of development bring progressive access to fifth, sixth, and higher dimensional levels of awareness, with each stage bringing qualitatively new understanding and qualitatively new capacities. The fifth dimensional access that the Syrian tradition identifies with the Christ consciousness frequency represents a particularly significant threshold, the point at which the soul begins to experience its own nature, not as a separate individual set over against an external universe, but as a unique expression of the single creative intelligence that underlies all existence. This experience, which many spiritual traditions across many worlds have described in various ways, is not the dissolution of individuality, but rather its fulfillment, the discovery that genuine individuality and genuine unity are not contradictory, but are complementary aspects of the one reality. The highest stages of soul development, which the Syrian tradition associates with the transition from what might be called individualized soul to cosmic consciousness, represent the completion of a journey that has lasted through many millions of years of experiential accumulation. At these highest stages, the soul's awareness encompasses not only its own history and the history of the civilizations it has been part of, but the entire sweep of cosmic evolution, the great arc of consciousness from its first individualization in physical forms of minimum awareness all the way to its return to the undivided source from which it arose, richer by the entire accumulated experience of its long journey. This is the state that the tradition describes as the completion of the Emerald Order's great purpose, the return of consciousness to itself through the full cycle of its expression in the many forms of individualized existence. Earth's current transition and the role of Syrian wisdom. Having traced the history of the Syrian civilization from its Lyron origins through its development across millions of years of galactic history, through its complex and consequential interactions with Earth and human civilization, and through its most significant technological and spiritual contributions, it remains to consider the significance of all of this for the current moment in Earth's history and the current stage of human civilizational development. For it is not only as ancient history that the Syrian tradition is relevant to the human world, but as a living presence and influence in the current time, a time that many traditions from many sources identify as one of the most significant transition points in Earth's long history of civilizational development. The current era on Earth is characterized by a confluence of pressures and possibilities that have no clear historical precedent, at least within the recorded memory of human civilization. On one hand, there is the accelerating development of human technology, which is approaching thresholds at which the technologies themselves begin to have civilizationally transformative power, independent of the wisdom or lack of wisdom with which they are directed. Artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and energy systems are all approaching or have passed thresholds at which their potential consequences extend far beyond what any previous generation of humans could have imagined. On the other hand, there is an accelerating expansion of human consciousness awareness, a global awakening of spiritual sensitivity, environmental awareness, and recognition of the interconnectedness of all life that is generating new kinds of values and new kinds of social movements across the entire surface of the planet. The Syrian tradition understands this confluence as not accidental. It sees the current moment in Earth's history as the product of a specific phase in the great cosmic cycles that govern the flow of dimensional energy through different regions of the galaxy. As Earth and its solar system move through a particular phase of their galactic orbit, they are entering a region of space where the energetic environment supports a qualitative shift in the dimensional accessibility of higher dimensional consciousness frequencies. This shift, which some traditions describe as the dawning of a new age, is not primarily a social or political event, but a dimensional one, a change in the energetic conditions of the Earth system that makes it possible and progressively easier for human beings to access states of awareness that have been largely inaccessible in the previous era. From the Syrian perspective, this dimensional shift is of the utmost importance not only for humanity but for the broader galactic community. The awakening of human consciousness potential, the activation of the extraordinary multidimensional interfacing capabilities encoded in the human genome, would represent the fulfillment of the original vision of the human project, the emergence of the cosmic heir that the highest aspirations of the genetic engineering program were aimed at creating. A fully activated human consciousness, combining the extraordinary biological creativity of the human genome with the depth of emotional and spiritual awareness that human beings have been developing through their long history, would be a being of extraordinary gifts and extraordinary potential contribution to the galactic community. The Syrian civilization, in its most positive and wisdom-aligned expressions, understands itself as having a specific responsibility in this transition, Rooted in its long history of involvement with Earth and humanity, that responsibility is not to direct or control the transition, which would violate the principle of self-determination that the Emerald Order places at the heart of its understanding of what genuine evolution means. Rather, it is to support the transition in every appropriate way, providing energetic assistance at the dimensional levels, transmitting wisdom through the channels of inspiration and the awakening of encoded memories in human consciousness, and when direct contact is appropriate and invited, offering guidance from the vantage point of a civilization that has itself navigated many of the challenges that humanity is now facing. The Sirian-aligned intelligences that maintain presences in the higher dimensional fields accessible from Earth are understood as being actively engaged in this support work in the current era, through various channels of transmission, including the awakening of starseed individuals who carry particularly strong Sirian genetic or soul heritage, the activation of ancient knowledge preserved in Earth's energetic and physical record, and the direct energetic interventions that are conducted in alignment with the governing principles of non-interference with autonomous development. The Sirian presence is working to support the most positive possible outcome of this extraordinary transitional period. The return of Christ consciousness and the galactic future. The deepest hope and the deepest commitment of the Sirian tradition, expressed at the end of the original text and carried as the central orientation of the entire tradition, is the return of what the tradition calls Christ consciousness to all beings. This phrase, which uses the name of one of Earth's most revered spiritual figures as a symbol, points towards something far larger than any particular religious tradition. Christ consciousness, in the Sirian understanding, is the fundamental nature of consciousness itself when it is operating without the distortions introduced by the various forms of separation, fear, and self-contraction that characterize less developed states of awareness. It is the natural state of a consciousness that has developed to the point where it can perceive and experience directly the truth of the unity of all beings within the creative intelligence that underlies all existence. The return of Christ consciousness to all beings is not understood as an event that will be imposed on the universe from outside, or that will happen to passive recipients, but as the natural outcome of the evolutionary process through which consciousness is progressively expanding its awareness across all dimensions and all forms of life. Every being in the universe is understood as being on this journey, some further along the path than others, but all moving, however slowly and however indirectly, in the direction of the full awakening that Christ consciousness represents. The Sirian tradition's commitment to this vision is not simply a religious belief, but is grounded in the direct experience of the many beings within the tradition who have advanced far enough on the path to perceive clearly the direction in which all consciousness is moving. The practical expression of this commitment in the current era is the sustained effort by the most wisdom-aligned elements of the Sirian and broader galactic community to support the conditions in which the awakening of all beings can proceed as rapidly and as fully as possible. This includes the transmission of wisdom, the provision of energetic support, the removal of obstacles where this can be done without violating the autonomy of those affected, and the holding of a space of unconditional love and acceptance within which all beings, however distorted their current expression may be, are recognized in their deepest nature as participants in the same evolutionary journey. The beings of the Sirian tradition who have advanced to the higher dimensional levels understand from their own experience that the conflicts, the suffering, and the apparent evil of the lower dimensions are not the final truth of those realities, but are expressions of incompletely developed consciousness in the process of its evolution toward greater wisdom and greater love. This understanding does not justify or minimize the real harm that distorted consciousness can cause, but it does provide a context within which even the most challenging aspects of galactic and human history can be held with equanimity and with hope as necessary episodes in a story whose ultimate direction is the progressive expansion of consciousness and the progressive realization of the unity and love that are the deepest nature of all beings. The message of the Syrian tradition for humanity in the current era is therefore one of hope grounded in understanding, of commitment to positive action grounded in the recognition of the extraordinary potential that the human being carries, and of encouragement to explore, with open minds and discerning hearts, the vast and magnificent story of which human civilization is a part. The universe is not the cold, mechanical, purposeless place that a certain narrow interpretation of physical science has sometimes suggested. It is a living, conscious, purposeful creation in which every being has a role to play, and in which the story of consciousness returning to itself through the full richness of its diversified expression is the great drama in which all are participants. The Syrian tradition, with all its complexity and all its imperfections, is one of the great tributaries of wisdom flowing into this story. Its contributions to the galactic community have been enormous, its failures have been instructive, and its deepest aspirations are aligned with the highest possibilities of existence. In studying its history and engaging with its wisdom, human beings are not merely satisfying intellectual curiosity, but are engaging with an aspect of their own deepest heritage, reconnecting with threads of understanding and experience that were woven into the fabric of human existence from the very beginning, and that remain available to those who approach them with the sincerity, the discernment, and the openness that genuine wisdom requires. The Syrian tradition asks nothing of those who encounter it except honest engagement, careful discernment, and the willingness to hold the largest possible understanding of what it means to be a conscious being in a conscious universe. It offers in return a perspective on existence that is both extraordinarily ancient and entirely relevant to the challenges and opportunities of the present moment, a perspective that has been tested in the fires of galactic history and refined through millions of years of accumulated experience, and that points consistently toward the same destination that all the great wisdom traditions of Earth have pointed toward: the awakening of consciousness to its own nature, the recognition of the unity that underlies all diversity, and the expression of that recognition in the form of genuine love and genuine service to the well-being of all. The stellar councils and their role in galactic governance. The system of galactic governance that oversees the interactions between civilizations, mediates disputes, and maintains the ethical frameworks within which advanced civilizations operate is far more complex and far more nuanced than any simple description can convey. Among the most significant of the governing bodies that operate within this system are what the Syrian tradition calls the stellar councils, collectives of highly advanced beings representing the wisdom traditions of multiple star systems who coordinate on matters of galactic significance. Understanding the structure and function of these councils is essential for understanding how the various civilizations discussed in this work relate to one another and to the broader framework of galactic law and galactic ethics. The stellar councils operate at multiple levels, from local councils that oversee specific regions of the galaxy or specific civilizational clusters, to higher-order councils that operate at the level of entire galactic sectors, to the highest councils whose scope of awareness encompasses entire galaxies and the relationships between them. The beings who serve on these councils are not selected through processes analogous to political election or appointed by authorities above them, but rather self-select through the natural process of consciousness evolution, coming to serve in council roles as a natural expression of the level of awareness and wisdom they have developed through their own evolutionary journey. The protocols that govern the Council's operations reflect the accumulated wisdom of billions of years of galactic civilizational experience. Chief among these protocols is the principle of minimal interference with autonomous civilizational development, which holds that more advanced civilizations may not simply impose their values, technologies, or social structures on less developed worlds, however well-intentioned such an imposition might be. This principle reflects the understanding, hard-won through many historical examples of interference gone wrong, that genuine development can only occur through the authentic experience and choices of the developing beings themselves, and that external imposition, however sophisticated, tends to produce stunted development rather than genuine growth. At the same time, the councils recognize that there are limits to non-interference, situations in which the actions of one civilization threaten the very existence or the fundamental rights of another, in which intervention becomes not merely permissible, but obligatory. The determination of where these limits lie and what form intervention should take when it is deemed appropriate is one of the most challenging and most continuously debated questions in galactic governance. The Syrian civilization has been directly involved in these debates on multiple occasions, both as a party whose actions have been scrutinized by the councils and as a party whose advocacy has influenced council decisions on matters affecting other civilizations, including Earth. The question of Earth's status within the framework of galactic governance has been one of the most persistently complex and contested issues in the council's recent history. Earth's situation is unusual in the degree to which its development has been influenced, and sometimes distorted, by the involvement of advanced external civilizations. The genetic engineering of humanity, the establishment of Anunnaki governance structures over human populations, the ongoing presence of various galactic factions pursuing their own agendas in and around Earth, and the systematic suppression of human spiritual and consciousness potential by some of these factions. All of these represent departures from the norm of autonomous development that the governing principles seek to protect. Addressing this complex situation in ways consistent with galactic law, while also acknowledging the realities of Earth's unique history, has required extraordinary diplomatic creativity and patience on the part of those committed to Earth's eventual genuine self-determination. The solutions developed over many generations of council deliberation are not simple or entirely satisfying to any party, but they represent the best available balance between competing principles and competing interests, with the ultimate goal of creating conditions in which humanity can gradually reclaim its autonomous development trajectory while benefiting appropriately from the positive aspects of the civilizational heritage it has received. The hidden history of Earth's geological transformations. The physical history of Earth itself, as understood in the Syrian tradition, differs significantly from the picture presented by conventional geological science, not because the physical evidence is interpreted differently, but because the Syrian tradition includes information about the causal factors behind many of Earth's major geological events that conventional science, limited as it is to purely physical dimensional explanations, has not been able to access. Many of the major catastrophes and transformations in Earth's geological history, events that conventional science explains entirely through natural physical processes, are understood in the Syrian tradition as having been significantly influenced by the conflicts and technological activities of the various civilizations that have been active in and around Earth throughout its history. The catastrophic event that the tradition describes as having torn Earth apart 4 million years ago, mentioned briefly in the original text, represents one of the most significant of these civilizationally influenced geological events. The details of this event are complex and draw on historical records from the Syrian tradition that go far beyond what can be reconstructed from Earth's physical geological record alone. What is clear from these records is that the event was not entirely natural in origin, but was partly the result of the application of technologies by parties whose specific identity and motivations are still debated that induced or amplified geological instability on a catastrophic scale. The aftermath of this event reshaped the surface of Earth in fundamental ways, eliminating entire ecosystems and civilizational presences that had been developing on Earth's surface, and setting the stage for the particular trajectory of biological and eventually human development that followed. The various flood traditions preserved in virtually every human culture, from the Sumerian flood narrative to the biblical Noah story, from the Hindu accounts of Manu to the indigenous traditions of Mesoamerica and the Pacific, are understood in the Syrian tradition as memories of a specific catastrophic event of relatively recent geological history, an event that caused enormous and rapid changes in Earth's surface conditions and ocean levels. The universality of this flood memory across cultures that had no historical contact with one another suggests that the event was truly global in its impact and was recent enough to have been experienced by human or near-human populations who preserved the memory through oral tradition. The Syrian tradition identifies this event as related to the dynamics of the Syrian-Anunnaki conflicts of the period, with the catastrophic flooding being partly a consequence of technological interventions designed to achieve strategic objectives in the conflicts of that era. Understanding Earth's geological and climatological history as the product not only of purely natural physical forces, but also of the technological activities of advanced civilizations operating in and around Earth over millions of years, opens up new perspectives on many aspects of that history that have puzzled conventional science. The extraordinary pace of certain evolutionary developments, the mysterious appearance and disappearance of biological forms in the fossil record, the evidence of advanced engineering in ancient structures around the world, the global distribution of mythological narratives that describe similar experiences of contact with sky beings and of catastrophic destruction and renewal. All of these puzzles begin to make more sense when viewed through the lens of the Syrian tradition's understanding of Earth's complex and multi-civilizational history, the Lemurian legacy and its influence on human culture. Among the civilizations that existed on Earth before the current era of recorded human history, the civilization known in various traditions as Lemuria or Mu holds a place of particular significance in the Syrian historical tradition. Lemuria, understood as a vast continental civilization that preceded the age of Atlantis and that was eventually destroyed by the combination of geological instability and civilizational conflict that characterizes the most turbulent periods of Earth's ancient history, represents in many ways the most direct predecessor civilization to contemporary humanity, the link between the civilizational heritage of the Syrian and other galactic traditions and the forms of social, spiritual, and cultural life that would eventually characterize human civilization. The Lemurian civilization was not a monolithic entity, but a diverse collection of communities and cultures spread across an enormous territory that, according to the Syrian historical records, extended across much of what is now the Pacific Ocean basin and surrounding land areas. The physical geography of Lemuria was dramatically different from that of the current Pacific region, with the tectonic and sea level conditions of the time supporting the existence of large continental land masses that have since been submerged or broken up by geological processes. The great diversity of ecological environments within this territory, ranging from high mountain regions to tropical lowlands to coastal and marine environments, supported an equally great diversity of human and near-human cultural expressions. The spiritual and philosophical foundation of Lemurian civilization was deeply rooted in the feminine polarity of the Syrian tradition, the orientation toward relationship, intuition, embodied wisdom, and the recognition of the sacred in the natural world that the Anunnaki and the Nomos had cultivated over millions of years. Lemurian culture expressed this orientation in forms that were appropriate to the level of technological and social development of the time, which was significantly less technically complex than what came before it in the Syrian civilization, or what would come after in Atlantis, but which in some respects expressed a quality of spiritual wisdom and relational intelligence that more technically complex civilizations sometimes struggle to maintain. The legacy of Lemuria in the current world is found primarily in the indigenous spiritual traditions of the Pacific region and its periphery, in the deep wisdom about the human relationship with the natural world, with the community of life, and with the unseen dimensions of existence that these traditions have preserved through many thousands of years of oral transmission and living practice. The shamanic traditions of many Pacific cultures, with their sophisticated understanding of the relationship between human consciousness and the natural world, their mastery of the states of consciousness that provide access to the higher dimensional fields, and their recognition of the living intelligence that pervades all natural forms, represent survivals of Lemurian wisdom that have endured into the present, despite the many pressures that have threatened to extinguish them. The Atlantean civilization and its connections to the Syrian legacy. The civilization of Atlantis, which features in the historical records of the Syrian tradition as one of the most significant and most complex chapters in Earth's prehistorical civilizational development, is understood as the direct successor to the Lemurian civilization and the direct predecessor to the earliest historical civilizations of Sumer and Egypt. The Atlantean civilization was, in the Syrian understanding, a synthesis project of enormous ambition, an attempt to bring together the highest achievements of the Syrian and related galactic civilizations in a physical dimensional context on Earth, creating a civilization that would express simultaneously the technical mastery of the Syrian tradition, the spiritual depth of the Pleiadian tradition, and the unique biological and consciousness gifts of the human species. At its height, Atlantis was by all accounts a civilization of extraordinary achievement. Its technological capabilities exceeded those of any civilization currently existing on Earth's surface, drawing on Syrian science and technology that had been transmitted to Earth through the various channels of galactic contact described in this work. Its spiritual traditions, similarly enriched by direct transmission from the highest expressions of multiple galactic wisdom lineages, produced forms of consciousness development and spiritual practice of remarkable depth and effectiveness. And its social organization, though never free of the tensions and contradictions that characterize any complex civilization, embodied at its best a genuine attempt to honor the full spectrum of human potential in its physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual dimensions. But Atlantis also inherited the deep tensions and conflicts of the Syrian civilizational legacy, and ultimately, it was these conflicts, amplified to catastrophic intensity by the extraordinary power of the technologies available to the Atlantean civilization, that led to the civilization's eventual destruction. The division between what the Atlantean tradition called the Sons of the Law of One and the Sons of Belial, between those committed to the principles of the Emerald Order and the service of the greater good, and those committed to the service of self and the accumulation of power, was the central drama of Atlantean history and ultimately the cause of its end, when the Sons of Belial, allied with various negative extraterrestrial forces, gained sufficient influence over Atlantean technological systems to direct them toward the service of their own agenda. The resulting misuse of power of extraordinary magnitude initiated the sequence of events that led to the final destruction of the Atlantean continent. The survivors of Atlantis, carrying with them fragments of the great wisdom and technology of their civilization, seeded the earliest historical civilizations of the post-Atlantean world, including the early Sumerian and Egyptian civilizations, the pre-Vedic civilization of ancient India, and the various megalithic cultures of prehistoric Europe. The knowledge they carried, filtered through the trauma of civilizational destruction and adapted to the very different circumstances of the post-Atlantean world, forms the deepest layer of what we know as ancient civilization, the stratum of understanding upon which all subsequent human intellectual, spiritual, and civilizational achievement has been built, often without the builders recognizing the true origin and nature of the foundations they were working upon. The transmission of Atlantean wisdom to the post-Atlantean world was not a simple or uniform process. Different groups of survivors carried different fragments of the whole, shaped by their particular areas of knowledge and training within the Atlantean civilization, by the circumstances of their departure, and by the specific destinations they reached and the cultures they encountered there. The priesthoods of the earliest Egyptian temples carried fragments of the Atlantean mystery tradition that emphasized the relationship between consciousness, geometry, and cosmic order. The earliest Sumerian scribes encoded fragments of Atlantean astronomical, mathematical, and historical knowledge in the cuneiform tablets that have survived to the present. The Vedic rishis carried the subtlest and most philosophically refined aspects of the Atlantean spiritual tradition, preserving them in the extraordinary body of revealed knowledge that eventually crystallized into the Vedic scriptures. No single surviving tradition preserved the whole of Atlantean wisdom. The complete picture can only be reconstructed by drawing on many different sources and recognizing the underlying unity that connects their apparently diverse contents. This work of reconstruction, which has been undertaken by many dedicated researchers and consciousness explorers in the current era, is one of the most significant intellectual and spiritual projects of our time, because the wisdom that was encoded in Atlantean civilization was not merely of historical interest, but was designed from the beginning to be available to human beings at precisely this point in their evolutionary journey, when the dimensional conditions of the current era make it possible to receive and actualize it in ways that were not possible in the intervening dark ages. The healing arts of the Syrian tradition. Among the many gifts that the Syrian civilization has transmitted to humanity through the various channels of direct contact, encoded wisdom, and genetic heritage, those in the domain of healing and the restoration of biological and consciousness well-being occupy a place of particular practical significance. The Syrian healing arts, which encompass a vast range of approaches from the purely physical to the purely consciousness-based and everything in between, represent one of the most thoroughly developed and most practically effective bodies of healing knowledge in this region of the galaxy. Their influence on Earth's healing traditions, while not always recognized as such, has been substantial and enduring. The foundation of the Syrian healing tradition is the understanding, already described in the context of the Nomos and their vibrational technology, that illness at every level originates not in the physical body itself, but in distortions of the higher dimensional information fields that generate and maintain the physical body's structure and function. Physical symptoms in this understanding are the last and most dense expression of imbalances that have their actual origin in the emotional, psychological, and higher dimensional aspects of the being. Addressing only the physical symptoms without reaching the underlying energetic and informational distortions is therefore understood as a fundamentally incomplete approach to healing, one that can provide temporary relief but cannot produce genuine, lasting restoration of well-being. This understanding shaped the development of Syrian healing practice in the direction of what might be called multidimensional medicine, an approach that addresses the full spectrum of dimensional levels at which a being exists and that works to restore coherence and balance at each level, from the most subtle, higher dimensional fields all the way down to the physical body. The specific techniques employed at each dimensional level varied according to the nature of the distortion being addressed and the particular capacities of the practitioner. At the physical level, the Syrian healing arts included extraordinarily sophisticated knowledge of biological chemistry, energetic anatomy, and the use of specific substances, sounds, and geometric forms as physical-level interventions. At the fourth dimensional level, they included techniques for working directly with emotional and psychological patterns, releasing the accumulated charges of unresolved experience that distort the emotional body and interfere with the natural flow of life energy. At the fifth dimensional and higher levels, they included consciousness-based practices for accessing and realigning the archetypal templates that govern the deeper patterns of biological and psychological expression. The transmission of Syrian healing wisdom to Earth has occurred through multiple channels across many historical periods. The most direct transmissions occurred during periods of close contact between Syrian Anunnaki beings and human populations, when healing arts were taught directly to human practitioners, who then preserved and transmitted them through initiatory lineages. The medical traditions of ancient Egypt, which operated through the temple system and combined what appears to modern eyes as an eclectic mixture of physical treatments, ritual practices, and consciousness-based interventions, reflect one of the most direct survivals of these early transmissions. The extraordinary effectiveness attributed to Egyptian healing arts in ancient accounts, which far exceeded what the conventional history of medicine would lead one to expect, reflects the genuine sophistication of the underlying Syrian tradition that informed them. Similarly, the earliest layers of Ayurvedic medicine in India, which is understood within its own tradition as a knowledge received from divine beings rather than invented by human practitioners, preserves aspects of the Syrian healing tradition in forms adapted to the Indian cultural context. The Ayurvedic understanding of the relationship between elemental forces, constitutional types, and the flow of vital energy through the body corresponds in many respects to the Syrian energetic anatomy that underlies its healing approaches, and the sophisticated psychophysiological understanding encoded in the older Ayurvedic texts suggests access to a level of knowledge about the relationship between consciousness and biological function that goes well beyond what could have been developed through purely empirical observation within historical time. The Syrian musical tradition and its cosmic significance. The relationship between the Syrian civilization and the phenomenon of music is one of the most profound and most practically significant aspects of the entire Syrian cultural heritage. For the Syrians, music is not primarily an aesthetic experience or a form of entertainment, though it certainly encompasses both of these dimensions. Music, in the deepest Syrian understanding, is the most direct physical dimensional expression of the cosmic creative process itself, the vibrational ordering of sound in time that mirrors and participates in the same vibrational ordering through which consciousness generates all of physical reality. To engage seriously with music in the Syrian tradition is to engage with the fundamental creative force of the universe through one of its most accessible and most humanly natural expressions. The Syrian musical tradition encompasses an extraordinary range of forms and applications, from the most intimate personal practices of meditation and consciousness cultivation through sound to the vast communal ceremonies in which thousands of voices and instruments generate fields of resonant sound powerful enough to produce measurable effects on the dimensional environment of entire regions. What unifies all of these forms, despite their enormous surface diversity, is the understanding of music as a living communication between consciousness and the universe. A communication that is most effective when it is generated not by mechanical processes alone, but by the conscious intention and emotional sincerity of the musicians who create it. The specific musical scales and tuning systems that the Syrian tradition has developed over millions of years are calibrated not according to arbitrary conventions of human preference, but according to the natural resonance properties of the dimensional fields with which they are designed to interact. Different tuning systems are understood as interfaces with different dimensional levels, and the choice of tuning system in a given musical context is therefore not merely an aesthetic decision, but a practical one, determining which aspects of the multidimensional reality the music will most directly engage. The transmission of specific Syrian tuning knowledge to Earth has been one of the most practically significant of the various wisdom transmissions, as the musical systems of several ancient civilizations, including those of early Egypt and the Vedic tradition, preserved frequency relationships that carry genuine dimensional activation properties. The influence of this understanding on the Syrian civilization's broader culture was pervasive and deep. Architecture was designed with acoustic properties in mind, so that the spaces in which the civilization lived and worked were themselves instruments of a kind, shaping and focusing the ambient sound environment in ways that supported the consciousness states most conducive to the work being done in each space. The great temples of the Syrian tradition were acoustic masterpieces as much as visual ones, their geometries calculated to create specific resonance effects that enhance the effectiveness of the ceremonial and consciousness cultivation practices conducted within them. This understanding was carried forward in the design of the most significant ancient structures on Earth, including the pyramids, whose acoustic properties have been studied by modern researchers and found to be far too sophisticated to be the result of chance. The legacy of the Emerald Order in the modern world. Throughout this entire account of Syrian history, from the ancient Lyron origins through the development of the great civilizations of the Sirius system, through the complex and consequential interactions with Earth, and through the current period of planetary transition, one thread has run continuously: the teachings and the aspirations of the Emerald Order. This tradition, which originated in the golden era of Lyron civilization and has been carried forward through every subsequent chapter of Syrian history, represents the deepest and most enduring contribution of the entire Syrian civilizational heritage to the life of this galaxy. The Emerald Order, as we have described it, is at its core an understanding of the nature of consciousness and of the purpose of existence, an understanding that recognizes all beings as expressions of a single creative intelligence that is in the process of exploring and knowing itself through the infinite richness of individualized forms of experience. From this foundational recognition flow the ethical principles and practical commitments that have guided the best expressions of the Syrian tradition throughout its long history. The commitment to the well-being and the free development of all beings, the recognition that genuine wisdom requires the integration of both the masculine and feminine polarities of consciousness, the understanding that advanced capability without advanced compassion is dangerous rather than beneficial, and the hope and expectation that the journey of consciousness, however long and however difficult, is ultimately moving toward a realization of unity and love that will vindicate every hardship endured along the way. The legacy of the Emerald Order in the modern world is found not in any single institution or tradition, but in the resonance that its fundamental insights continue to generate wherever and whenever they are genuinely encountered. The human beings who, in every culture and every era, have recognized the unity that underlies apparent diversity, who have been moved by compassion to work for the well-being of beings beyond their immediate circle, who have dedicated themselves to the pursuit of wisdom for its own sake, rather than for the power it might confer. These are all, whether they know it or not, participants in the stream of consciousness that the Emerald Order has carried forward from its origins in the ancient Lyron civilization. The coming era on Earth, which from the Syrian perspective represents the most significant opportunity for the genuine fulfillment of the human potential that has been gestating through all the long and complex history described in these pages, is an era in which the insights of the Emerald Order will become increasingly accessible to human beings who are ready to receive them. The dimensional shift that is currently underway is not only a cosmic physical event, but a transmission, a vast broadcasting of the frequencies of higher dimensional wisdom into the consciousness field of the Earth and of every being who inhabits it. Those who are prepared to receive this transmission, who have cultivated the openness, the sincerity, and the discernment that genuine wisdom requires, will find that the universe itself is speaking to them in a language that, on some level, they have always known. This is the deepest message of the Syrian tradition for humanity in this extraordinary moment. That the potential you carry is real, that the wisdom encoded in your deepest nature is genuine, that the universe is not indifferent to your journey, but is actively and lovingly engaged in supporting your awakening, and that the story of which you are a part is one of the most magnificent and most meaningful stories in the entire history of this galaxy. You are not alone. You have never been alone. And the homecoming that the wisest part of you has always sensed is possible is not a dream, but a destination toward which the entire trajectory of conscious evolution is moving. One step, one awakening, one act of genuine love at a time. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I love hearing from you. Check out more videos on the screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.